Welcome back to the channel. It's so good to have you here again. In tonight's video, we're going to do something a little different, a little magical. We'll be diving into one of the most fascinating literary journeys of all time, the story behind the story. A quiet, winding tale about the creation of Harry Potter, from a scribbled idea on a train to a billion-dollar world that changed how we read, how we imagine, and how we grow up. You may think you know the books, but tonight you'll learn how they were built, the early struggles, the secret rejections, the late-night edits in small cafes, and the quiet choices that shaped the wizarding world we've all come to know so well. This is the true, unfolding story of J.K. Rowling, the publishing world that first said no, the unlikely rise of a quiet manuscript, and how it became the most beloved story of a generation. So find a comfortable spot, dim the lights, and get cozy. Because we're about to begin a long-form narrative journey designed to help you rest, dream, and maybe even remember what made you fall in love with magic in the first place. If you enjoy slow, immersive storytelling like this, you can softly tap the like button. It helps the channel in ways you wouldn't believe. And if you're new here, feel free to subscribe so you don't miss future journeys into the stories behind the stories. Before we begin, let me know in the comments, what time is it where you are? Are you listening late at night? Early morning? Or somewhere quietly in between? Wherever you are, you're exactly where you need to be. Let's begin. This is the story behind The Boy Who Lived. It began with a delay. A train, late departing from Manchester to London King's Cross, slid into an unexpected pause across the English countryside. The windows were fogged slightly from the spring chill, the landscape drowsy and unremarkable, a canvas waiting for imagination. Amid the half-filled compartments and rustle of bored commuters, a woman with unkempt hair and a head full of half-formed ideas stared out the glass and suddenly saw him, a boy with messy black hair, glasses, and a lightning bolt scar. He didn't know he was a wizard. Not yet. Joanne Rowling, not yet the J.K. that would become a global trademark, did not have a pen on her. She had no notebook. But what she had was a writer's mind, sharp and endlessly turning. She began to imagine the contours of his world. A school, a train ride, a hidden society of magic layered beneath the ordinary world. She saw his name, Harry, as clearly as she had ever seen anything. That train journey in 1990 would become the mythic moment of conception, retold countless times in interviews and profiles. But the years that followed it were not gilded by destiny. They were hard, lean years, and the story of Harry Potter was built slowly, in longhand, across scraps of paper and stolen time. Back in London, Joanne returned to a life in transition. Her mother, Anne, was gravely ill, suffering from multiple sclerosis. The grief of watching her decline settled into the backdrop of those first writings. When Anne died, Rowling had not yet told her about Harry. She would say later that her mother's death cast a shadow over the entire series, that the longing for family, for lost parents, became the emotional root system of Harry's own story. She wrote in cafes. She wrote while working as a bilingual secretary. She wrote during brief spells of quiet. In 1991, she moved to Portugal to teach English as a foreign language, where she married and gave birth to her daughter, Jessica. The marriage was short-lived. By the end of 1993, she returned to the UK with her child in tow, now a single mother in Edinburgh, surviving on state benefits. It was here that legend and labour intertwined. The young woman with a stroller, pushing her way to cafes where she could write in the warmth while her baby slept. And still, she wrote. Pen on paper. Longhand. Rowling had envisioned not just a single book, but 7, one for each year of schooling at a magical academy she would call Hogwarts. She had mapped out the major beats of each novel, a sprawling mythology etched with precision, even as her own life hung on tenuous threads. By 1995, Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone was complete in draft form. She typed it herself on a borrowed typewriter, a painful, meticulous task. The manuscript was bulky, printed on A4 paper and secured with a rubber band. She mailed it to literary agents, tucked with a standard query letter. 12 rejections came in succession. One agent, Christopher Little, originally passed as well, until his assistant fished the submission out of the pile and gave it another look. There was something promising in the boy wizard, something different. He agreed to represent her. Still, even with representation, Rowling's manuscript struggled to find a home. Major publishers passed. The story was too long. Too strange. The market wasn't ripe for a children's book of that length and complexity, they said. But in 1996, a small publisher in London named Bloomsbury took a chance. The chairman's 8-year-old daughter read the first chapter and immediately demanded the next. It was a powerful, instinctive vote. Rowling was offered a modest advance, £1,500, and Bloomsbury committed to a print run of just 500 copies, only 300 of which were intended for sale. Her editor, Barry Cunningham, advised her to keep her day job. There was no hint, not even a flicker, of what the book would become. The name Joanne Rowling was swapped for the gender-neutral J.K. Rowling, a publisher's decision, born from the belief that young boys might be less inclined to read a book by a female author. Rowling, having no middle name, borrowed the K from her paternal grandmother, Kathleen. The first edition was released on June 26, 1997. It was a quiet debut. The book trickled into bookstores and school libraries, mostly unnoticed. But something strange began to happen. Readers, children and adults alike, weren't just enjoying the book. They were devouring it. And they were passing it along. Grassroots momentum began with word of mouth, spreading among parents and educators. Librarians praised its depth, humor, and emotional complexity. Children, notoriously fickle in their reading habits, returned again and again to the story of the boy under the stairs, the school of spells, the trio of friends fighting evil. The turning point came in 1998, when Scholastic, the American publisher with deep ties to the U.S. school market, bid for the U.S. rights. In a heated auction, they secured it for $105,000, a staggering sum for a debut children's book. Rowling, attending a phone booth to receive the news, reportedly cried. Scholastic made one significant change, the title. Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone became Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, a marketing decision rooted in concerns that young American readers wouldn't understand the philosophical reference. Rowling, reluctantly, agreed. It was one of her first concessions to the machinery of global publishing, but not the last. The book's US release was paired with a strong school outreach campaign. Advance reading copies were sent to teachers, reading specialists, and child psychologists. A grassroots Harry Potter buzz began to build in independent bookstores and at PTA meetings. Word of mouth was again the engine, but now with fuel, Scholastic's distribution network and marketing budget. Children stood in line to borrow the book from libraries. Teachers read it aloud in classrooms. Bookstores began hosting readings. What had begun with a £1,500 advance was becoming something else entirely. Rowling remained deeply involved with the editorial process. She had a meticulous understanding of her characters and their arcs, and she resisted efforts to dilute the text for marketability. She fought, for example, to preserve the distinctly British idioms, the references to cricket and treacle tart, the tone of a world built in stone castles and under grey skies. She insisted on continuity, not just of plot but of soul. And it paid off. The second printing ballooned. Foreign rights sales followed in rapid succession. Translations rolled out. And Rowling, once scribbling in cafes, now found herself sitting in front of television cameras and microphones, stunned and slightly dazed. But even amid this first wave of success, she was careful. The creative and business foundations of the Harry Potter series were being laid stone by stone. She kept tight control over her intellectual property. She had input on everything from cover designs to publicity tours. When film interest emerged, quickly and fervently, she imposed specific terms. She retained veto rights over casting and script decisions. She would not allow her story to be reshaped into something she didn't recognize. As the second book neared publication, the first had already begun winning awards: the Nestlé Smarties Book Prize, the British Book Award for Children's Book of the Year. Bloomsbury increased its print runs. Scholastic expanded their school programs. The lightning bolt had struck. But the most crucial element, the one that would sustain the series through 7 books and a decade of cultural dominance, was trust. Children trusted Rowling. They trusted that her world made sense, even when it was scary. They trusted that the story, like all good stories, would lead them somewhere meaningful. And Rowling, in turn, trusted them to follow her into deeper waters. The transition from literary curiosity to cultural event happened so swiftly that even Rowling, with her precise attention to detail and long-held belief in the story's power, found herself overwhelmed by the magnitude. With Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone in circulation and beginning to chart on bestseller lists, she now faced a new kind of pressure: how to continue the story without compromising its heart, and how to maintain authority over a rapidly expanding universe. By early 1998, she had completed the second book, Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, once again returning to longhand and then revising it through multiple drafts. Her writing was still rooted in discipline, early mornings, handwritten pages, and deep immersion in the narrative arcs of her characters. Despite the swelling media attention, Rowling shielded the work itself from interference. She knew precisely where Harry's story was going, had known from the beginning, and remained steadfast in her original vision. Behind the scenes, Bloomsbury was recalibrating its publishing strategy. The initial modest print runs gave way to confidence. The first book had proved that children would read, and reread, longer novels if they were engrossing. It shattered the long-held publishing convention that young readers had limited attention spans. With this in mind, Bloomsbury prepared a print run of 10,000 copies for the sequel. They also started laying groundwork for collector's editions, marketing tie-ins, and a more visible author profile. At Scholastic, the momentum was even more electric. The US edition of The Sorcerer's Stone had captured imaginations across the country. Word spread in schools, in online parenting forums, in reading clubs. The company, which had specialized for decades in educational publishing, realized they were no longer just distributing a children's book, they were nurturing a cultural juggernaut. To support Rowling's vision, Scholastic kept the American editions close in spirit to the British originals, resisting pressures to Americanize the prose beyond the title change. That decision proved prescient. Readers connected with the authenticity of Hogwarts, its quirks and Britishisms, as part of its charm. Meanwhile, Rowling, who had faced poverty and obscurity just a few years earlier, now found herself fielding invitations to literary festivals, interviews on BBC Radio, and speaking events where children waited hours to hear her read. She was shy but warm, often speaking directly to the children in the room. They were her most important audience. She didn't court celebrity, and she never glamorized the sudden shift in fortune. Instead, she framed success through the lens of story. A reward for perseverance, and a testament to imagination. As the Chamber of Secrets launched in July 1998 in the UK and September in the US, the publishing world noticed something unusual: children were buying hardcover books. They were asking for them by name. They were saving allowances, returning to stores, waiting in lines. It was as though a portal had opened between reader and writer, one that didn't follow the rules of conventional book sales. To support the growing interest, Bloomsbury began planning staggered releases, coordinating with Scholastic to build simultaneous excitement across markets. This coordination marked the beginning of a more intentional global strategy. While Rowling herself remained committed to the writing, she increasingly collaborated with publicists, editors, and international rights agents to ensure the series was protected and expanded without being diluted. The third book, Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, would prove pivotal. Not just because it deepened the series' mythology, introducing darker themes and morally complex characters like Sirius Black, but because it showed the series was aging with its readers. Rowling wasn't afraid to challenge young minds. She knew grief, betrayal, and injustice weren't too heavy for children to understand. She'd lived them herself. She wove them into the series with care, with dignity. The creative decisions behind the scenes reflected that same care. Rowling began working more closely with her editors on larger continuity questions. She had files upon files of notes, family trees, magical rules, character arcs. She was building a layered, consistent universe, and every decision had to honor that scaffolding. If a magical law appeared in Book 3, she wanted to make sure it could hold up in Book 7. Her notebooks were filled with timelines, maps, cross-reference spell logic, and carefully plotted character transformations. By the time The Prisoner of Azkaban was released in July 1999, Harry Potter was no longer just a book series. It was a cultural movement. Children showed up in costume at bookstores. Adults confessed to borrowing copies from their kids. Schools used the books in curriculum. Even literary critics began to take notice, albeit with some skepticism, as if afraid that popularity might erode the legitimacy of Rowling's work. But the numbers spoke clearly. In the UK, first-day sales for Azkaban reached over 60,000 copies. In the US, Scholastic released a 1 million-copy print run. Rowling's careful collaboration with publishers, her insistence on quality and coherence, had paid off. She was no longer simply a breakout author, she was the architect of a publishing phenomenon. In tandem with the rising readership, discussions around film rights had begun in earnest. Warner Brothers emerged as the dominant bidder, offering not just a generous sum but a commitment to Rowling's vision. She stipulated several conditions before signing. The films must be British-made. The primary cast must be British actors. The storylines must remain faithful to the source. She would not allow Harry's world to be washed over in the transatlantic gloss of Hollywood fantasy. That insistence was more than pride, it was creative control. Rowling understood that Harry Potter worked because it was internally consistent, culturally rooted, and emotionally honest. To compromise that would be to unravel the spell she had worked so hard to cast. Even as these negotiations took place, Rowling was retreating once again into writing mode. She was deep into the fourth book, the longest and most complex so far. Meanwhile, her personal life, once private and quiet, was now lived under a magnifying glass. Paparazzi staked out her house. Rumors swirled. She was scrutinized not just as an author, but as a public figure, a woman, a mother. She handled it with remarkable poise, giving interviews on her terms, refusing to feed the gossip cycle. When she did speak publicly, she often returned to the fundamentals, storytelling, character, the moral underpinnings of the series. She never lost sight of her original goal, to finish all 7 books and to do them justice. What few outside the publishing world realized at the time was that the commercial engine behind Harry Potter had become one of the most sophisticated and tightly coordinated global strategies in literary history. Translations into dozens of languages were underway. Rights managers worked tirelessly to align international editions. New cover art was adapted for local markets, often with Rowling's feedback. Merchandise began to appear, cautiously, selectively. Rowling approved some products but resisted cheapening the brand. She understood that the books, not the toys, were the foundation. And she never outsourced the storytelling. Every plot twist, every character revelation came from her desk. As the phenomenon grew louder, she wrote more quietly. With the fourth book, Rowling would usher Harry into adolescence and take readers along a deeper emotional journey. The first spark had come from a delayed train. But the fire, sustained, intentional, and carefully fed, was now an inferno spreading across continents. And Rowling, once an unemployed mother scribbling on napkins, had become the rarest thing in literature, not just a best-selling author, but a world builder with full creative authority. By the dawn of the new millennium, Harry Potter had become more than a publishing success. It had begun to alter the shape of modern childhood. The fourth book, Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, was not just a highly anticipated release, it was an event of international magnitude, marked by midnight parties, global press coverage, and long lines snaking outside bookstores around the world. Yet behind the spectacle, Rowling's life was still anchored in a steady, almost sacred discipline, the writing itself. She had become more guarded, less accessible to the media, but her work remained faithful to its foundation. The fourth book pushed her creatively and structurally. At over 700 pages, it was a leap in scope, introducing readers to international wizarding cultures, new layers of magical lore, and most importantly, the return of Lord Voldemort in full, terrifying form. Goblet of Fire was released simultaneously in the UK and US on July 8, 2000, a strategy years ahead of what most publishers would risk. It required tight security. Finished copies were stored in locked warehouses, delivery routes coordinated with secrecy, embargoes strictly enforced. There were even legal agreements binding bookstores not to sell the book ahead of schedule. Scholastic and Bloomsbury orchestrated the release like a military operation, and the demand justified it. On release day, over 3 million copies were sold in the US alone, a figure unprecedented for a children's book. In the UK, readers queued at midnight, and stores opened their doors to cheers and wand-waving children in wizard robes. The fourth installment was darker, more emotionally complex, and it proved Rowling could raise the stakes without losing her audience. Within publishing circles, the phenomenon had entered an entirely new category. This wasn't just about units sold, it was about the redefinition of what children's literature could be. Other publishers scrambled to find the next Harry Potter. Fantasy trilogies flooded the market. Magic became the wove into her world. The creative risks she took in Goblet of Fire had also set a new tone. Cedric Diggory's death, sudden, brutal, and without narrative cushion, shocked readers. But Rowling had never promised a sanitized world. Her characters would face consequences. They would lose people. And through those losses, they would grow. Rowling's relationship with her readers was becoming more intimate, almost sacred. Fan letters poured in by the thousands. Children sent her their own stories, questions, drawings. Many wrote about grief, anxiety, bullying, the same themes threaded through the books. Rowling read as many as she could, often responding personally. She understood that she was no longer writing in a vacuum. Her words carried weight far beyond their pages. As her fame deepened, so did the infrastructure around the franchise. The film rights, officially sold to Warner Brothers in 1999, were now in active pre-production. Chris Columbus had been tapped to direct the first film. Casting became a national obsession in the UK, with open calls held for schoolchildren across Britain. Rowling insisted, adamantly, that the main cast be entirely British. It wasn't negotiable. Her involvement with the films was extensive, if sometimes understated. While she didn't write the screenplays, she met regularly with producers, gave feedback on scripts, and held veto power over major creative decisions. Most of all, she was the source, the only person who knew the full arc of the story, including secrets that wouldn't be revealed for years. She quietly fed information to the filmmakers about characters' futures to help shape performances and narrative pacing. Meanwhile, she was already writing Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, a book she would later describe as the hardest of the series to complete. It took 3 years, the longest gap between books so far. During that time, Rowling's life became increasingly insulated. Public scrutiny was relentless. Tabloids pried into her finances, her relationships, her past. Speculation swirled about writer's block, burnout, and the pressures of success. In truth, the delay came not from crisis, but from complexity. Order of the Phoenix was the turning point in time, where Harry became not just a boy surviving danger, but a young man facing systemic injustice. The Ministry of Magic's denial of Voldemort's return mirrored Rowling's own distrust of power structures. Dolores Umbridge, the sugary, sadistic bureaucrat installed at Hogwarts, was a departure from previous antagonists. She was not a dark wizard, but an institution, a symbol of corruption wrapped in pastel smiles. The book also gave readers Dumbledore's army, the Room of Requirement, and a more haunted Harry, one struggling with isolation, rage, and grief. Rowling had never infantilized her readers. Now she asked them to follow her into the depths of emotional truth, and they did, in greater numbers than ever before. When Order of the Phoenix was finally released on June 21, 2003, it broke every existing record. Over 5 million copies were sold within the first 24 hours globally. In the UK, police were dispatched to manage the crowds outside bookstores. In the US, Scholastic coordinated cross-country midnight events, complete with actors, props, and wand-making workshops. The machine behind the series was now immense. But Rowling kept her focus clear. She continued to work alone, often writing in long stretches through the night, still drafting in longhand on paper. She remained deeply involved in the editorial process, reviewing typeset proofs herself, challenging suggestions that threatened continuity or character integrity. Her editors knew she would push back, and they respected it. She had earned the final word. In those years, the Harry Potter universe expanded into theme parks, stage plays, and a flood of merchandise. Yet Rowling's control over the brand was unusually strong. She refused to license certain products, most notably, she resisted attempts to create Harry Potter-branded junk food. She did not want the series to become a gimmick. She wanted it to remain, first and always, a story. Even her approach to fame reflected a studied restraint. While she accepted awards, including an OBE from the Queen, she turned down most endorsements and high-profile appearances. She stayed close to her home in Edinburgh, where she now owned property and worked in private. Her circle remained small, her priorities unchanged. As the 6th book approached, the mood in the fandom shifted. Children who had first read Philosopher's Stone at age 8 or 9 were now teenagers. The books had matured with them. Rowling had orchestrated one of the rarest feats in literature, a single series that aged organically alongside its readers, neither talking down nor pandering. And yet, in private, she felt the pressure acutely. Each book was now released into a media frenzy. Rumors leaked, sometimes true, sometimes wildly fabricated. Security tightened. Proof copies were guarded like classified documents. Online forums speculated about every possible twist. Fans tried to decipher her interviews for clues. But Rowling never lost control. The world she had built, the boy she'd seen on a delayed train, remained fully hers. Every plot, Every wand movement, every flash of green light was shaped by her hand. She was, by then, the most successful author in the world. But that was never the point. The real magic had always been the story. Between the publication of Order of the Phoenix and the impending release of the 6th book, the Harry Potter fandom entered its most fevered and imaginative phase. The books had seeded a vast and intricate world, and with each new entry, Rowling had deepened the mythology, expanded the lore, and opened doorways to endless interpretation. By the early 2000s, that world had become sacred territory. The Harry Potter canon, a term once reserved for theological debate or Star Trek hierarchies, became a living document, as alive and fiercely guarded as the stories themselves. Canon, as fans understood it, referred to every officially published word that came from Rowling herself, the novels, interviews, official companion texts, and, increasingly, Rowling's own comments on her website. Every detail mattered. The color of a wand, the name of a goblin, the ingredients in a potion, all were treated as puzzle pieces in a grand narrative schema. Theories were not idle speculation, they were built like legal arguments, sourced and footnoted. Dedicated fans constructed vast archives and databases to organize this information. Websites like the Leaky Cauldron, MuggleNet, and the Harry Potter lexicon became canonical centers of gravity. Lexicon entries were cross-referenced with book citations. Maps of Hogwarts were drawn by hand and shared online. Family trees were charted. Entire essays were written on wand lore, time-turner mechanics, or the properties of magical bloodlines. By the end of Order of the Phoenix, the wizarding world had grown so robust, so full of narrative tendrils, that fans felt not just invited to speculate, they felt responsible for preserving continuity. Harry Potter was not just a series of books, it had become a literary ecosystem. And Rowling, famously meticulous, had encouraged this mindset by keeping her lore consistent and layered. What fans knew by this point was considerable. Lord Voldemort, once Tom Riddle, was obsessed with conquering death and had survived his own killing curse via dark magical means. The prophecy revealed at the end of Order of the Phoenix foretold that neither can live while the other survives, tethering Harry and Voldemort in mortal opposition. Snape, once a Death Eater, now served as a double agent, but his loyalties were murky. Dumbledore, though immensely powerful, was not omniscient. He had failed to share key information with Harry. Sirius Black was dead, the first major character lost in battle, and his death marked a turning point in tone and stakes. A room in the Department of Mysteries contained a locked door, one that neither Harry nor his friends could open. Dumbledore later said it contained a force more wonderful and more terrible than death, than human intelligence, than forces of nature. Fans believed it was love. Speculation swirled around certain unsolved mysteries that had been deliberately left hanging. What was the significance of Harry's scar? Could it be a Horcrux? Fans wondered, though the term itself had not yet been introduced. What, exactly, was the full nature of the connection between Harry and Voldemort? Could one possess the other? Could their minds merge or collapse? What had Dumbledore seen in Snape that earned him such unwavering trust? Could Sirius return from behind the veil? Was death, in the magical world, truly irreversible? What role would Draco Malfoy play? Would he turn traitor to Voldemort or dive deeper into darkness? Who was the mysterious RAB referenced in the Black family tapestry scene in Order of the Phoenix? This fragment sparked thousands of forum threads. Among the fandom's most deeply held, and hotly contested, beliefs was that Rowling had planted breadcrumbs from the very beginning. Nothing, they argued, was accidental. Why, then, had she included that throwaway line about a vanishing cabinet in Chamber of Secrets? Why had she introduced certain minor characters like Regulus Black only in passing? Fans combed old books for offhand mentions of locket-like objects, mysterious strangers, and spells used only once. A growing theory among readers was that Voldemort had split his soul into multiple pieces to evade death. While the concept of Horcruxes had not yet been named, the clues, and the obsession with soul magic, were strong. Some speculated that he had hidden pieces of his soul in symbolic relics, items tied to Hogwarts founders, powerful magical artifacts, or even in people. The most radical, and increasingly popular, theory was that Harry himself was a Horcrux. How else to explain the mental link to Voldemort? The shared dreams? The inexplicable pain in his scar when Voldemort was near. Fans debated this idea with urgency, even anguish. If true, did it mean Harry would have to die for Voldemort to be defeated? Another cluster of theories focused on Dumbledore himself. Though beloved, he was now seen as more fallible, more Machiavellian. Fans questioned whether he had manipulated Harry. Why had he left him with the Dursleys? What was his relationship with Grindelwald, a name mentioned only once, but remembered? And then there was Snape, the enigma. No character inspired more polarized debate. Was he a tragic hero or a lurking villain? His occlumency lessons with Harry had shown flashes of vulnerability, even trauma. But his coldness, his cruelty, especially to Harry, made many suspect he was biding time for betrayal. Still, others saw in him the shape of a double life, a man twisted by guilt and unrequited love. These theories, and countless others, filled blogs, forums, LiveJournal fan communities, and fan fiction archives. The fandom operated like a literary intelligence agency, parsing clues and anticipating moves. Rowling, knowing this, took a peculiar pleasure in watching it all unfold. She even hinted in interviews that some fans were very, very close to the truth, but never said who or what. She used her author website, a virtual study full of interactive clues, like a locked door and floating scraps of parchment, to release tantalizing facts, middle names, backstories, wand woods. She confirmed and debunked rumors in equal measure. She fed the fire, but never extinguished the mystery. At this time, the fandom was not just reading the books, it was living in them. Canon had become a cultural compass. Lore was sacred scripture. Fan-made timelines, magical encyclopedias, and predictive essays were exchanged with the seriousness of scholarly journals. The Potterverse was a living text, its center anchored in Rowling's words, but its boundaries shaped by the shared experience of reading, questioning, believing. The sense of anticipation for Book 6 was unlike anything the publishing world had seen. It was not merely a book release, it was the continuation of a myth that millions were co-authoring in their imaginations. Everyone wanted to know, who was the Half-Blood Prince? Would Dumbledore fall? Would Snape be unmasked? Could love, the quiet theme stitched through every page, truly be a magical force stronger than death? When Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince finally arrived, readers would find many answers. But as always, Rowling would offer them with new questions attached. By the summer of 2005, J.K. Rowling was no longer simply a novelist, she was a cultural force. The weight of expectation around the 6th installment in her series, Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, was immense. Every new book had broken the record set by its predecessor, but this time, there was something sharper in the air. The fandom, having matured alongside the series, was no longer merely excited, it was on edge. After the tragic climax of Order of the Phoenix, which saw the death of Sirius Black and the revelation of the prophecy, readers braced for what came next. Rowling had spoken little during the intervening years. She offered updates through her website, appearing now and then for a festival or interview, but the public knew she was, as ever, immersed in writing. The pressure to deliver a satisfying narrative while still protecting the endgame was heavier than ever. But Rowling had become a master of silence. She knew the power of a withheld truth, the fuel of a good mystery. Half-Blood Prince was released simultaneously in major markets on July 16, 2005, backed by unprecedented security, logistics, and global marketing. Bloomsbury printed over 2 million copies for the UK release alone. Scholastic printed 10.8 million in the United States. Around the world, bookstores prepared for midnight openings with countdown clocks, themed parties, costume contests, and stage reenactments of past scenes. When the embargo lifted, the frenzy erupted. Within 24 hours, over 6.9 million copies were sold in the United States, averaging over 250,000 books per hour. These were figures no publishing executive had ever conceived of for a novel, let alone a children's book. Rowling, writing quietly from her Edinburgh home, had done the impossible again. But beyond the numbers, Half-Blood Prince marked a tonal pivot. The humor and lightness of early Hogwarts years were now overshadowed by the slow rise of war. The book opened not with a magical whimsy, but with prime ministerial dread, a chilling reminder that the wizarding world was bleeding into the Muggle one. Voldemort's return was no longer speculative, it was happening, and no one was safe. Rowling's storytelling, always careful, had reached a new level of emotional sharpness. She gave readers a deeply personal glimpse into Tom Riddle's origins, building a villain not of shadow alone, but of trauma, charm, cruelty, and calculated choice. These revelations were not just background, they were clues. In showing Voldemort's path, Rowling laid the framework for Harry's. More significantly, she introduced the concept of Horcruxes, finally naming what many fans had already begun to suspect. The soul-splitting, object-binding ritual of ultimate dark magic was more horrifying than anything yet revealed in the series. Voldemort's immortality was not simply a magical oddity, it was a systematic dismantling of his own humanity. And, crucially, it had limits. It had weaknesses. Rowling had placed the weapon in Harry's hands, but with it came a mission far darker than anything Hogwarts could train him for. While fans devoured these revelations, Rowling pulled the ground from beneath them again. The final chapters of Half-Blood Prince brought about the most shocking moment in the series to date, the death of Albus Dumbledore. The scene, atop the astronomy tower, wand disarmed, trust betrayed, was brutal in its clarity. Snape, the man whom Dumbledore had defended to the end, raised his wand and struck. Avada Kedavra. The green flash. The body falling. For many readers, it was unthinkable. A storm of emotion followed, grief, denial, fury, speculation. Could Dumbledore have faked his death? Was Snape working undercover? Had he and Dumbledore planned it all? Rowling had weaponized the very structure of trust she had built for 5 books. With that one act, she made the stakes real. If Dumbledore could die, anyone could. The book's title, The Half-Blood Prince, had teased readers with mystery for months. The revelation that the prince was Severus Snape offered little comfort. Instead, it deepened the enigma. Fans debated what the title truly meant. Was it a nod to lineage? To duality? To betrayal? Theories multiplied. And Rowling, as always, said little. The character work in Half-Blood Prince was among her most elegant. Harry, now 16, navigated young love, jealousy, grief, and purpose in tandem. His relationship with Ginny blossomed organically, a quiet payoff to seeds planted years earlier. Ron and Hermione's slow-burn dynamic reached new peaks of tension and frustration. But even in these romantic entanglements, Rowling never let the looming darkness fade. She managed something rare, she matured the story with her readers. As they aged, so too did the content. No longer was Hogwarts a safe haven, it was a fortress under siege. Death Eaters infiltrated the school. Trust eroded. And Harry, once a boy caught in a current, began to steer toward fate. Rowling's behind-the-scenes involvement remained intense. She collaborated closely with Bloomsbury and Scholastic on pacing, design, and marketing, but retained her autonomy in shaping the manuscript. She fought to keep certain chapters untouched, ensured character arcs were protected, and verified that artwork, summaries, and promotional materials never spoiled key moments. At this point, her role in the franchise was unmatched. She was not just the author of Harry Potter, she was its final authority, its continuity master, its moral and creative compass. The global literary world, meanwhile, recalibrated itself around her. Universities developed entire courses around Potter lore, ethics, and symbolism. Cultural critics began comparing her to Tolkien, C.S. Lewis, and Dickens, authors whose moral clarity and myth-making had defined generations. And yet, Rowling continued to describe herself simply as a writer who got lucky. With 6 books complete, there remained just one more, the final volume, the culmination of every clue, prophecy, and emotional thread. Rowling had long known how it would end. In interviews, she revealed that she had written the final chapter years earlier and kept it in a locked drawer. Now came the hardest part, saying goodbye. She knew the 7th book would be a departure. It would not be set at Hogwarts for most of the story. It would challenge Harry in ways no classroom could prepare for. The themes would be heavier: sacrifice, war, the cost of power. And she knew she would have to kill characters her readers loved. As she began writing Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, the world waited, breath held, theories primed, hearts braced. But Rowling, as always, returned to the solitude of the page. Back to her notebooks, her outlines, her carefully constructed universe. The end was near. But for the boy who had lived, and for the woman who had dreamed him into being, one final journey remained. The writing of Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows. Final installment with the weight of legacy on her shoulders, and the finality of parting. She had known the ending from early on. She'd mapped out the 7-book arc years before the first novel was published, scribbling story beats and character fates on scraps of paper, many of which still lived in files and boxes in her Edinburgh home. The last word of the series, Scar, had been written long before she knew where the middle would take her. But now, at last, she was filling in the final blanks, writing not just to complete a story, but to lay it to rest. Rowling's work during this period became more protected than ever. She moved between writing spaces, including the Balmoral Hotel in Edinburgh, where she finished the manuscript in room 552 and famously signed a marble bust of Hermes with the words, J.K. Rowling finished writing Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows in this room, 552, on the 11th of January, 2007. The final book was not just an ending, it was an answer. To the prophecy. To the mystery of the Horcruxes. To the question of whether love, as Dumbledore had always insisted, was the most powerful form of magic. Rowling dug deep into the mythos she had built across thousands of pages and allowed her characters, at last, to face the full consequences of their choices. Deathly Hallows diverged structurally from previous books. It spent little time at Hogwarts. Instead, it followed Harry, Ron, and Hermione on a raw, painful, sometimes aimless journey across the magical countryside. They hunted Horcruxes while being hunted themselves. The wizarding world had fallen to Voldemort. Institutions were corrupted. Death Eaters operated openly. The trio was truly on their own. It was a bold narrative choice, and Rowling stood by it. She wanted readers to feel the uncertainty, the fear, the isolation of war. The middle of the book is slower, even disorienting by design, a reflection of Harry's own lack of direction. Some fans struggled with this shift, but many recognized its brilliance. The final book was not meant to be comfortable. It was meant to be honest. When Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows was finally announced, the anticipation reached a global fever pitch. The release date, July 21, 2007, was made public in February, and within minutes, pre-orders flooded in. Amazon received over 1.5 million in the first 24 hours. Bookstores braced for what would become the largest single-day book release in publishing history. Rowling made only a handful of public appearances during the lead-up. In interviews, she was visibly emotional. "This is it," she told one journalist. "This is the end of 17 years' work." The knowledge that children who had grown up with the series would now finish it as teenagers or young adults added to the sense of communal closure. Bloomsbury and Scholastic coordinated an international release with even tighter security than previous launches. Armed guards escorted pallets of books. Stores received shipments under lock and key. Embargo agreements were enforced down to the minute. Despite all precautions, spoilers leaked online just days before the release, photographs of entire pages, alleged plot summaries. But the core fanbase resisted them. Many fans logged off social media entirely, avoiding websites and chat rooms to protect the reading experience. Rowling herself pleaded with readers not to spoil the book for others, and for the most part, they honored that request. When midnight struck on July 21, 2007, bookstores across the globe opened their doors. Children and adults alike poured in, some in costume, many holding back tears. It wasn't just a book release, it was a goodbye. Deathly Hallows sold over 8.3 million copies in the US in its first 24 hours, over 11 books per second. In the UK, another 2.65 million copies flew off shelves. Globally, it would go on to sell more than 15 million in the first weekend alone. As readers turned the pages, they wept, gasped, and held their breath. Hedwig, Mad-Eye, Dobby, Fred, Lupin, Tonks. Death did not spare the beloved. Rowling did not flinch. But the pain was purposeful. The final book was a war story. A redemption story. A final test of loyalty, love, and sacrifice. And at its core, there was Severus Snape. His final memories, offered to Harry in a moment of death, reframed everything. The bitterness, the cruelty, the long-standing animosity. Suddenly, readers saw the boy beneath the man, the love he never let go of, the promise he made to protect Lily Potter's son, even while hating what Harry represented. "Always," he said. And the fandom's perception of Snape was changed forever. Rowling had always said that Dumbledore was right to trust Snape. In the end, readers understood why. The book's climax, set in a shattered Hogwarts, was operatic. Students, teachers, centaurs, house elves, all took up arms. Voldemort fell not by brute force, but by Harry's understanding. By choice. Harry embraced death, used the Hallows wisely, and refused power. He defeated Voldemort not with a spell, but with love, sacrifice, and humility. The prophecy fulfilled itself not by fate, but by character. The final chapter, the 19 years later epilogue, was met with mixed feelings. Some found comfort in its peace. Others longed for more depth. But Rowling knew what she was doing. She wanted the series to end with hope. With Harry, scarred but whole, sending his own son off to Hogwarts. When she finally closed the book, Rowling grieved. "I feel a huge sense of release," she told the press. "But it's also like a death." She had written the series in private cafes, in small flats, through heartbreak and struggle. Now it was done. 7 books. 4,100 pages. Over 500 million copies sold. A generation changed. The business impact was seismic. Harry Potter had become the most successful literary brand in history. The books were translated into over 80 languages. The films, then still in progress, were guaranteed blockbusters. Theme parks were underway. A new lexicon of pop culture had been born, with words like Muggle, Hogwarts, and Dementor becoming part of everyday speech. But for Rowling, the success was never the point. The power of the books had always been about story. About a boy who lived. About friendship and bravery and the messy, painful, luminous choices that define who we are. The series had ended. But its magic, carefully constructed, fiercely protected, deeply loved, had only just begun to live in the hearts of readers forever. When Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows closed with its 19 years later epilogue, the story, canonically, was complete. The final pieces had been placed. Voldemort was dead. Hogwarts had survived. Harry, Ron, and Hermione had lived and grown and moved on. The prophecy fulfilled itself. Snape's arc had been redefined. And fans, for the first time in 10 years, were not waiting for another book. But that didn't mean the theorizing stopped. If anything, the fandom's obsession with lore intensified. Now that the endpoint was known, readers raced backward, combing the earlier books for symmetry, symbolism, and hidden foreshadowing. Canon, once a living document updated with every release, became a vault of interconnected detail, and debates over what it meant grew more fierce, not less. One of the dominant post-series discussions focused on Dumbledore. With the final revelations of his past, his early friendship with Grindelwald, his youthful thirst for power, and the tragic death of his sister Ariana, fans began re-evaluating him not as a benevolent mentor, but as a deeply flawed man shaped by guilt. Many saw him as a morally grey character who had raised Harry like a pawn, sacrificing him for the greater good, not unlike Grindelwald once preached. Others defended him as a man who had grown from his mistakes, who had built a life defined by penance and compassion. The same complex revision occurred with Snape, whose final act of loyalty and enduring love became one of the most debated turns in the series. Some readers anointed him a tragic hero, the bravest man I ever knew. Others pointed to his lifelong cruelty toward students, his inability to see Harry as more than James's son, and his role in endangering many. The fandom divided, not on facts, but on emotional interpretation. Then came the Horcruxes. With the full set now revealed, fans delved into symbolism and patterns. The diary, the power of memory and manipulation. The ring, family, heritage, and cursed ambition. The locket, isolation and the corrosion of self-worth. The cup, corrupted legacy and greed. The diadem, intellect twisted into arrogance. Harry himself, innocence, sacrifice, and destiny. Nagini, the idea of possession, of something once neutral turned entirely monstrous. Each Horcrux, many argued, represented aspects of Voldemort's psyche, and of Harry's trials. Rowling had embedded a narrative mirror within her magical logic, and fans eagerly dissected it. Another popular focus became the Deathly Hallows themselves. The cloak, the stone, and the wand, symbols of conquest, grief, and humility, were now viewed as a counterweight to the Horcruxes. Some fans mapped characters onto the three brothers of the fable. Voldemort, who sought the wand, power. Snape, who longed for the stone, lost love. And Harry, who accepted death, wisdom. Others wondered if Harry had, by technicality, become the true master of death. He had possessed all three Hallows. He had died willingly and returned. Yet Rowling left this ambiguous. The message was clear. The Hallows were not about power, but about how one faced mortality. In parallel to these literary explorations, debates emerged around post-epilogue canon. Rowling, though finished with the books, continued to engage with fans. In interviews, she revealed scraps of information that extended the world. Luna Lovegood would become a naturalist and marry Newt Scamander's grandson. Neville Longbottom would become a respected herbology professor at Hogwarts. Harry would become head of the Auror Office, eventually revolutionizing the Ministry of Magic. Hermione would rise to a powerful position within the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. Draco Malfoy, though reformed, would remain aloof from Harry, always marked by past choices. Each of these revelations sparked joy, and sometimes resistance. For many fans, the books were the gospel. Everything else was as word of Rowling, interesting, but not sacred. This rift intensified as Rowling launched her official fan website, Pottermore, in 2011. The platform provided short essays, lore expansions, wand assignments, and house sorting, but also introduced new canonical material, such as Professor McGonagall's tragic romantic backstory, the true origin of Azkaban, the founding of Ilvermorny, the American Wizarding School, details on magical creatures, historical figures, and ministry secrets. Some fans embraced this expanded canon. Others felt overwhelmed. If everything could be explained, what room remained for mystery? Some felt Pottermore over-explained once enigmatic elements, reducing their narrative potency. Meanwhile, the film adaptations were entering their final stage. As Deathly Hallows the book hit shelves in 2007, the movie franchise had just released Order of the Phoenix, directed by David Yates, who would go on to direct every subsequent Potter film. Warner Brothers, recognizing the narrative weight of the final book, made the unprecedented decision to split Deathly Hallows into two separate films. This was both a commercial strategy and a creative necessity. The studio and Rowling agreed, the story could not be condensed without losing its emotional and thematic depth. Production on Deathly Hallows Part 1 and Part 2 ran concurrently, with principal photography beginning in 2009 and lasting over a year. The final films were grim, expansive, and deeply emotional. Part 1 mirrored the book's slower, more meditative tone, focusing on Harry, Ron, and Hermione's isolation, inner tensions, and slow progression toward understanding. Part 2, by contrast, was war. The Battle of Hogwarts. The fall of Voldemort. Redemption, death, and final choices. Rowling remained involved throughout. While she did not write the scripts, she met frequently with screenwriter Steve Kloves, advising on plot integrity and offering exclusive knowledge about characters and backstories. She made clear which story beats were sacred, Snape's memories, Dobby's death, the final duel, and approved the epilogue's recreation on the King's Cross set. When Deathly Hallows Part 2 premiered in July 2011, the global reception was monumental. It became one of the highest-grossing films of all time. Audiences cried openly in theaters. The cast, many of whom had grown up on set, said their final goodbyes with trembling voices. For fans, the release of the final film felt like the closing of a chapter twice over. First, the books. Now, the adaptations. The story of Harry Potter, in its original form, was complete. But the world it had created, the arguments, the theories, the love, would continue to echo. In fanfic archives, in podcasts, in scholarly essays and midnight conversations. The books were over, but the world, magical, messy, alive, was forever open. The years following the release of Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows marked a transformation, not just for J.K. Rowling, but for the legacy of her work. The story was finished, but the world she had created refused to fade. Rather than settling into literary retirement, Rowling found herself in a new, more complex role, not just the author of a generation-defining series, but the steward of a global brand, a custodian of a fictional universe that millions had come to see as real. In the immediate aftermath of the book's release and the final film's debut in 2011, Rowling entered a phase of redefinition. She had become one of the most recognizable and wealthiest public figures in the world. But her relationship to fame remained uneasy. Though she was gracious in interviews and public appearances, she often spoke of the mental toll of global scrutiny, of wanting to reclaim private space. In 2012, she released her first post-Potter novel, The Casual Vacancy, a work of literary fiction aimed squarely at adults. Set in a quiet English town and dealing with class, politics, and small-town hypocrisies, the book was met with anticipation and intense media analysis. Though it sold well, reactions were mixed. Some praised her sharp social commentary and risk-taking, others missed the magic. But Rowling made one thing clear: she could, and would, write outside of Hogwarts. Privately, however, she was already laying the groundwork for a different kind of return to the wizarding world. That same year, Rowling launched the long-promised Pottermore platform, a curated, immersive digital hub that gave fans a controlled re-entry into her universe. Through Pottermore, readers could be sorted into houses, discover their patronus, and explore previously unreleased lore through J.K. Rowling exclusives, essays, timelines, and mini-histories that deepened the canonical universe. This wasn't a new novel, but it was a trickle of new magic. Still, readers wanted more. And in 2013, Rowling surprised the world again, this time under a pseudonym. Publishing a detective novel called The Cuckoo's Calling under the name Robert Galbraith, she intended to test whether her work could stand without her fame. For a few months, it did. The book received modest praise, seen as a solid debut in crime fiction. But the ruse didn't last. When the secret broke, via a leak from a law firm, sales skyrocketed overnight. Rowling confirmed it, and the Galbraith series took off. She had successfully crossed into a new genre. But the pull of Hogwarts was never far behind. In 2013, a seismic announcement was made: Rowling would be penning the screenplay for a new series of films based on Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, one of the companion books she had originally published for comic relief in 2001. Set in the 1920s and centered around magical zoologist Newt Scamander, the films would serve as a prequel to the Potter timeline, opening up an entirely new era of wizarding history. It marked the first time Rowling would write directly for film. Unlike the adaptations of her novels, Fantastic Beasts was her story from the ground up, translated directly to screenplay. The first installment was released in November 2016, starring Eddie Redmayne, and was met with a mix of curiosity and nostalgia-fueled enthusiasm. The film expanded the wizarding world across the Atlantic, introducing MACUSA, the American Magical Congress, new magical creatures, and early hints of a brewing global conflict involving a young Gellet Grindelwald. It was an ambitious move, one that positioned the franchise as not just a literary saga, but an open, ever-expanding universe. Yet it wasn't without challenges. As the Fantastic Beasts films continued, with The Crimes of Grindelwald in 2018 and The Secrets of Dumbledore in 2022, critical reception grew more divided. Fans struggled with tonal shifts, convoluted plotting, and inconsistencies in lore. Some questioned why familiar characters were shoehorned into new timelines, or how certain canonical contradictions were allowed to stand. Rowling, now screenwriter rather than novelist, faced criticism for changes in pacing and character logic. The series had its moments of wonder, but for many fans, it lacked the soul that defined Harry's story. Simultaneously, in 2016, the curtain rose on Harry Potter and the Cursed Child, a two-part West End stage play co-written by Rowling, playwright Jack Thorne, and director John Tiffany. The story followed an adult Harry Potter, now a ministry official, and his son Albus Severus as they grapple with legacy, time travel, and the burden of names. From a theatrical standpoint, it was a triumph. Critics lauded the production for its technical innovation, choreography, and visual magic. The play won 9 Olivier Awards and later opened on Broadway to similar acclaim. But among readers, reaction was mixed. Many struggled with the time-turner-driven plot, the perceived characterization inconsistencies, and the premise of Voldemort having a child. It raised the question again, when does canon stretch too far? Rowling's involvement in all of this, Pottermore, the Fantastic Beasts scripts, Cursed Child, solidified her role not just as an author, but as the architect of a vast transmedia property. She had gone from a woman scribbling in cafes to the head of a billion-dollar narrative franchise that now spanned publishing, film, theater, merchandise, mobile games, theme parks, and more. She remained protective of the world she had built. But as the fan base evolved and new generations entered Hogwarts through the films and online content, Rowling's relationship with her fandom became more complex. Social media gave her unprecedented access to readers, and them to her. But it also blurred boundaries. Starting around 2019, her statements, particularly those on social and political topics, drew backlash from portions of the fan base. For some, her commentary on gender and identity clouded the legacy of her work. Debates emerged about separating art from the artist. Some longtime fans distanced themselves. Others defended her fiercely. It marked a shift in the perception of Rowling, especially among the youngest fans who had not grown up with midnight releases but had entered the series through movies or streaming platforms. For them, the world of Harry Potter remained powerful. Strike Novels under her pseudonym published new writing on the wizarding world and oversaw franchise development. The Hogwarts Legacy video game, released in 2023, allowed fans to explore a richly realized magical world, albeit one set far before Harry's time. Throughout it all, Rowling's core identity remained intact, a storyteller first. She still described writing as the work that grounded her, that saved her. And despite the noise, of press, of politics, of fan discourse, her legacy as the creator of one of the most enduring and beloved fictional worlds of the 21st century remained undeniable. Harry Potter was no longer just a story. It had become, in some ways, a mythology, as enduring, debated, and reshaped as any cultural epic. And Rowling, for better or worse, was its origin. For a generation, perhaps more than one, Harry Potter was not merely read. He was lived. To speak of the books as a literary phenomenon is to describe only their outer shape. Inside, they were something quieter and more powerful, a shared rite of passage. A doorway into a world that felt more like memory than fiction. An invisible thread that stretched across bedrooms, train rides, hospital wards, school hallways, and kitchen tables. For many, the release of Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows was not just the end of a series, but the end of an era, the final bookend to a childhood marked by waiting for the next chapter to arrive. The story had grown with its readers. It had taught them how to imagine, how to question, how to grieve, how to stand up. It had taught them to trust in something bigger than themselves, even when the way was dark. And now, it was over. The final page closed. The dust jacket slid back into place. The wand was laid down. In the days and weeks that followed, fans described a strange ache, a phenomenon dubbed post-Potter depression. It wasn't sadness in the usual sense. It was the disorientation of stepping back into the Muggle world after so long in another. Of realizing the next summer would come without a new book. That no one else would get their Hogwarts letter, not really. That platform 9 3/4 would remain a metaphor. But in that silence, something beautiful bloomed. Readers began to reread, not to discover what happened, but to live again with characters they had come to love as deeply as old friends. Fan fiction exploded in volume and diversity. New stories, alternate endings, romantic reimaginings, and untold perspectives poured from keyboards and spiraled into online archives. Hogwarts, it seemed, was bigger than its creator. It belonged now to all who had walked its halls in their minds. And those minds had changed. In classrooms, Harry Potter became required reading. Not just for vocabulary or plot structure, but for ethics, for empathy. Teachers used the series to discuss trauma, resilience, courage, and loss. In therapy sessions, children used the Dementors to describe depression, the Patronus as a symbol of hope. Scholars debated the metaphors of blood purity, resistance, memory, and mortality. Academics compared Voldemort's rise to totalitarian histories, unpacked the politics of the Ministry, examined the gender dynamics of leadership at Hogwarts. It was fiction. And yet, it wasn't. To wear a house crest on a backpack, to debate whether Snape was good, to quote Dumbledore in a eulogy, these were not fan activities. They were acts of identification. The line between reader and character had grown soft. The world was imagined, but the love was real. And somewhere beyond the spotlight, beyond the sales figures and premieres and interviews, there was a train. A real one, years ago, delayed outside London. And a woman with no pen. Just an idea. A boy who didn't know he was a wizard. A scar. She hadn't known then what it would become. No one could have. That this one story would become a kind of home. But it did. And even after the pages ended, that home remained. In the quiet between books, in the long nights of waiting, in the laughter and arguments and rereads, something unshakable was formed. A story that asked what it meant to be brave. What it meant to be chosen. What it meant to choose. In the years that followed the close of the Harry Potter saga, the books did not fade, they embedded themselves more deeply into the fabric of culture. What had begun as a fantasy series for children had evolved into a cornerstone of modern literature, a publishing watershed, and a subject of ongoing academic, cultural, and generational conversation. Rowling's series didn't just sell well, it redefined how books could be written, published, taught, and experienced. In classrooms across the world, teachers who had once been students with their noses buried in goblet of fire now handed the same books to their own students. The series was folded into curricula not just as fiction, but as moral literature. Discussions on prejudice and systemic bias found footing in the blood purity allegory. Government corruption and censorship were explored through the Ministry of Magic and Rita Skeeter. Concepts of trauma and healing were addressed using Harry's own psychological journey, from the cupboard under the stairs to the forest where he walked willingly into death. Universities introduced entire courses on Harry Potter. Not simply in English departments, but in theology, philosophy, politics, and education. Scholars examined the archetypal structures of Rowling's narrative, the hero's journey, the mentor-mentee relationship, the Christ allegory in Harry's death and resurrection. Others unpacked the symbolism of wands and patronuses, the etymology of spell work, the psychology of characters who embodied everything from narcissistic abuse to survivor's guilt. And yet, while the books lent themselves to serious inquiry, they never lost their accessibility. One of Rowling's greatest achievements was writing literature that was both layered and luminous, equally beloved by 10-year-olds and tenured professors. In publishing, the series left an indelible mark. After Harry Potter, the idea that children's books were commercially limited was obliterated. Prior to 1997, middle grade and young adult books were often considered niche. But the Potter series proved young readers were capable of following long, complex, emotionally rich narratives, and doing so in mass numbers. Publishers began taking greater risks. Series like Percy Jackson, The Hunger Games, Divergent, and Twilight followed in Harry's wake, launching their own franchises, adaptations, and fan movements. The midnight book release, once unthinkable, became a marketing staple. Bookstores built launch events around Rowling's schedule. The idea of spoilers entered mainstream vocabulary. Children waited outside shops, in sleeping bags, for stories. Reading had become a public act. The books also helped shift the perception of the author. Rowling's visibility, her persona, and her interactive engagement with fans, especially in the early 2000s, elevated the writer to a kind of rock star status. She wasn't just a name on a spine, she was a presence, a guide, a living mind behind the magic. Fans trusted her, sometimes to a fault. Her approval or disapproval of interpretations became canon unto itself. But perhaps the most enduring impact was cultural. The Harry Potter fandom did not dissolve after the final page, it matured. Online communities evolved into sophisticated archives, forums, podcasts, and think pieces. Websites like MuggleNet and the Leaky Cauldron became media outlets. Podcasts like Harry Potter and the Sacred Text invited listeners to read the books as spiritual and philosophical texts. Fans created content across every imaginable platform, from TikTok cosplays to deep literary dissections on YouTube. Fan fiction, once considered fringe, blossomed into a vast landscape of creativity. Some stories spanned hundreds of thousands of words, meticulously exploring alternate timelines, missing scenes, or entirely new interpretations of characters. It wasn't simply filler. For many readers, fan fiction offered closure, diversity, or emotional exploration that the canon only touched on. Queer readings of characters like Sirius Black or Remus Lupin emerged from deep readings of subtext. Feminist reinterpretations gave depth to minor characters like Lavender Brown or Narcissa Malfoy. In time, a younger generation, who had not waited in midnight lines but streamed the films and binged the books, joined the fanbase. They brought with them new perspectives, sensitivities, and critiques. They questioned older assumptions. Why was Hogwarts' curriculum so rigid? Why were goblins rendered with such particular imagery? Why did characters of color play secondary roles? These questions were not attempts to unravel the magic, but to evolve it, to carry it forward with more inclusivity and introspection. The Potterverse remained fertile ground for adaptation and reimagination. Theme parks in Orlando, Osaka, and London gave fans tangible immersion: Butterbeer, Diagon Alley, wand ceremonies. Studio tours showcased props, costumes, and set design. These were pilgrimages for many, physical ways to walk through their imagination. Warner Brothers continued to license content with caution and grandeur, maintaining a high bar for brand integrity. But legacy, as ever, was not without complexity. As Rowling continued to engage publicly, through interviews, Pottermore essays, and eventually Twitter, her statements, especially those on gender and identity, stirred deep divisions in the fan base. For many, this introduced an emotional conflict. How to love a story when its author's views didn't reflect their values? Discussions about death of the author re-emerged with intensity. Some readers separated the work from its creator. Others walked away. Still, the books endured. Their resonance was not contingent on perfection, not in prose, nor in public relations. It came from the fact that, in a rare alchemy of timing, imagination, and truth, Rowling had written something that touched the deep human need for belonging. She'd created a place where children saw themselves, flawed, scared, brave, loved, and believed that the world, though broken, could be changed. And they took that belief with them. Into classrooms. Into hospitals. Into courtrooms, rallies, protests, and family dinners. The lessons of Hogwarts became more than fiction. They became ethical touchstones. The world isn't split into good people and Death Eaters. It is our choices that show what we truly are. Happiness can be found even in the darkest of times. The magic, it turned out, was never just in the spells. It was in the readers who carried those words out of the pages and into their lives. In the early 2000s, as the Harry Potter books gained momentum and readers waited with bated breath for each new installment, a parallel universe quietly bloomed online, a space where the unfinished story became a canvas, and fans took up the quill where J.K. Rowling left off. Fanfiction archives, fanfiction.net, LiveJournal communities, later archive of our own, swelled with works that mirrored the emotional urgency of the books. At the center of this literary sprawl were stories that didn't merely retell, they reimagined. What if Voldemort had won? What if Sirius lived? What if Hermione had chosen Draco? What if Harry never went to Hogwarts at all? Among the earliest and most influential fics was Harry Potter and the Methods of Rationality by Eliezer Yudkowsky, published from 2010 to 2015. In this alternate universe, Harry is raised not by the Dursleys, but by a loving, science-minded aunt and a rationalist stepfather. The result is a highly intelligent, logic-obsessed Harry who arrives at Hogwarts not to discover magic, but to deconstruct it. The story became something of a cultural artifact in rationalist and tech communities, praised for its use of philosophy, game theory, and scientific rigor. It redefined what fan fiction could be, not just indulgent wish fulfillment, but a philosophical thought experiment. At the other end of the emotional spectrum was My Immortal, often considered the most infamous Harry Potter fanfic ever written. Poorly spelled, melodramatic, and likely satirical, this story followed Ebony Darkness Dementia Raven Way, a self-insert goth vampire witch. Through a bizarre, chaotic Hogwarts full of gothic angst and narrative disarray. Whether it was a parody or an earnest attempt is still debated, but it remains one of the most widely read and discussed pieces of fan fiction in internet history, a kind of fandom folklore, immortal in its absurdity. But in the vast middle ground between parody and philosophy emerged a wave of character-driven, emotionally resonant fan fiction that dared to go where canon could not. One of the most read was After the End by Arabella and Xenia, written in the early 2000s and hosted on Fiction Alley. It picks up the story in the summer after Voldemort's defeat, years before Deathly Hallows, and follows the Golden Trio as they return to Hogwarts to rebuild their world and their relationships. The fic focused on grief, healing, and romance. It wasn't just a placeholder for the next book, it was a communal act of processing trauma, both fictional and personal. Ships, shorthand for romantic relationships, defined large swaths of early fan fiction. Harry Ginny, Ron Hermione, and Draco Hermione, or Dramione, dominated search fields, but new interpretations surged too. Snape Hermione, dubbed Snarmione or SSHG, gave voice to complex explorations of trauma, age gaps, and power dynamics. Harry Draco, Drarry, became a flagship for queer reinterpretations of canon's rivalries. These weren't always written for resolution, they were explorations of identity, of friction, of transformation. Some fanfics grew so popular they were adapted into original novels. Others remained online, passed like sacred texts between readers, referenced in academic papers, or preserved in offline backups. For many fans, these works offered solace, catharsis, or simply the chance to imagine different fates for beloved characters. In this era, fan fiction was no longer seen as literary trespassing, it was a vital form of engagement. It said, "You told your story, and now we'll tell ours." As the original series concluded and the films neared their end, a new phase of Harry Potter fan fiction emerged, more ambitious, diverse, and self-aware. No longer constrained by the need to fill the gap between books, writers began crafting long-form works that sought to reframe the universe through marginalized lenses, alternate histories, and emotional recontextualization. One of the most celebrated works of this era was All the Young Dudes by M.S. Kingbeen 89, a 500,000-word epic chronicling the life of Remus Lupin at Hogwarts and his slow-burning, tragic romance with Sirius Black. Written with painstaking detail and set entirely before the events of Philosopher's Stone, the fic dives deep into coming-of-age, queerness, grief, and the unrelenting weight of a war they're too young to fight. It became a literary phenomenon unto itself, with thousands of playlists, fan art pieces, TikTok tributes, and even audiobook recordings circulating online. Some fans regard it as emotionally richer than canon itself, a reclamation of subtext made textual. Another fan favorite, Manacled by Sen Lin Yu, plunged into the bleakest timeline imaginable. Voldemort has won, and Hermione, suffering from memory loss, is forced into a magically binding relationship with a high-ranking Draco Malfoy. Inspired by The Handmaid's Tale, it is dark, devastating, and richly psychological. With over 350,000 words, it explores trauma, resistance, and the complexity of power and intimacy under oppression. It's not for the faint of heart, but for those willing to go there, it's unforgettable. Other major works from this era took on canon silences and reimagined them boldly. The Life and Times by Jules V, a Marauders-era epic exploring Lily Evans and James Potter's teenage years through war, loss, and defiance. Remain Nameless by Hey Jude 19, a modern AU, alternate universe, in which Hermione and Draco navigate post-war loneliness in Muggle London. Turn and Face the Strange by Olivia Lupin-Tonks, a time travel story where Harry gets a second chance to rewrite the war, not through power, but through empathy. These works reflected the shifting values of the fandom. Stories became more inclusive, more introspective. Characters who once served as comic relief or villains were recast as tragic heroes. Mental health, identity, queerness, and trauma were not side notes, they were central. Fan fiction also became more visible. Archive of Our Own, AO3, launched by the Organization for Transformative Works, gave fan creators a protected, searchable, and respected home. It changed everything. For the first time, fanfic was treated with scholarly attention. Writers received recognition, interviews, even book deals. Some went on to publish original works, their fan fiction portfolios treated like legitimate literary apprenticeships. No longer dismissed as just fanfic, the best of these stories were viewed as parallel literature, created not to usurp canon, but to speak with it. To argue, reimagine, and continue the conversation. And as the years passed, and new readers entered the fandom without ever having experienced the book releases in real time, many discovered the world of Harry Potter not just through the novels, but through fan fiction itself. For them, Hogwarts was always more expansive, more diverse, more fluid. It was a place where canon ended, and community began. As rich and immersive as the wizarding world of Harry Potter is, its boundaries with the real world have always been porous, sometimes clearly connected to real-life history, and sometimes conspicuously absent from it. Fans have long asked, which real-world events are canon within the magical universe? Which global events happened in tandem with the timeline of Harry Potter, and which seem to have been omitted entirely? The short answer is, Rowling's universe is both parallel to and selectively divorced from Muggle history. Wizards coexist with Muggles, but they largely observe from the shadows, interacting with non-magical events only when absolutely necessary. As a result, certain events from real-world history are canon within the wizarding world, while others are conspicuously absent, or reinterpreted through magical logic. What is real-life canon? The World Wars, World War I and World War II. Rowling has confirmed in various interviews that both world wars occurred in the Harry Potter timeline and had indirect consequences for the wizarding world. While wizards do not seem to have participated directly in those conflicts, the rise of fascism and totalitarianism is mirrored in the arc of Lord Voldemort's ideology. particularly in the obsession with purity, control, and extermination of those deemed lesser. Grindelwald's rise to power, beginning in the early 20th century, is explicitly tied to the broader global unrest of that period. His defeat by Dumbledore in 1945 is not coincidental, it's the same year World War II ended. The founding of the United States and global colonization. In the Fantastic Beasts lore and supplemental writing on Pottermore, Rowling canonized major real-world milestones, such as the colonization of the Americas, the establishment of MACUSA, the Magical Congress of the United States of America, shortly after the U.S. Declaration of Independence, and the existence of African, Asian, and indigenous magical community, which has drawn criticism. The existence of British institutions and monarchy. The British Prime Minister exists and is aware, reluctantly, of the magical world. This is canon, established in the opening chapter of Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, where the current Prime Minister is visited by Cornelius Fudge and later Rufus Scrimgeour. Though unnamed, this implies that British politics, including elections, governance, and history, runs in parallel with magical society. Pop culture and Muggle technology, canon references to the real world are rare, but not absent. The Dursleys watch television. Aunt Petunia cooks bacon and uses an electric cooker. Dudley plays video games. There are cars, newspapers, drill companies, and police. Rowling situates the magical world firmly alongside the modern non-magical one. Harry's early years with the Dursleys are deeply rooted in 1990s England, complete with cereal brands, postcodes, and public school systems. Holidays and traditions, Christmas, Halloween, Easter, and Valentine's Day are celebrated within Hogwarts and the Wizarding world, traditions inherited from broader British and Christian culture. While wizards appear to have their own origin stories and folklore, e.g., the tale of the three brothers, they participate in many Muggle holidays, though in their own eccentric ways. What isn't canon, or seems ignored? Major Muggle conflicts after World War II. There is no mention of the Cold War, the Vietnam War, 9/11, or any other major geopolitical events from the late 20th and early 21st century. These conflicts presumably occurred in the Muggle world, but Rowling never weaves them into wizarding awareness. Wizards seem profoundly detached from global warfare, unless that war is magical in nature. Modern technology, while real-world technology exists, televisions, radios, cars, it is presented as largely useless or foreign to wizards. Hogwarts famously lacks modern plumbing in early versions of the lore, though this was later revised. Wizards do not use the internet, cell phones, GPS, or email. The technological evolution of the Muggle world appears to run parallel to magic, but wizards remain almost entirely removed from it. This isn't just disinterest, it borders on aversion. Civil rights movements and social progress. There is no mention of the civil rights movement, Stonewall, feminism, climate activism, or other major cultural revolutions in the Muggle world. While the themes of prejudice, bigotry, and equality are symbolically explored through blood status and magical hierarchy, there is no clear mapping onto actual Muggle social history. Wizards have their own forms of systemic discrimination against Muggle-borns, werewolves, centaurs, house elves, but these exist in a moral vacuum unconnected to Muggle progress or advocacy. Religion, beyond folklore. While some characters, like the Dursleys, are clearly culturally Christian, they celebrate Christmas, go to church weddings, etc. Explicit religion is nearly absent from the magical world. Rowling confirmed in interviews that Hogwarts students come from many faiths, including Jewish wizards like Anthony Goldstein, but religious institutions, traditions, or spiritual ideologies are never shown to intersect with magical life. This absence is intentional, likely to keep the magical world as neutral and inclusive as possible. Real political movements or historical leaders, post-1945. No modern politicians, global organizations, e.g., the UN, or named historical figures outside of the 1945 era appear in canon. Wizards do not reference Muggle presidents, policies, or political ideologies outside their own society. This reinforces the insular nature of magical governance and its deep separation from Muggle global history. Rowling built a wizarding world that runs alongside the real one. Sharing space, sometimes brushing up against it, but always keeping its own timeline, its own logic. Some historical events, like the World Wars or European colonization, were canonized and repurposed as background lore. Others were left untouched, creating a world that feels real but remains purposefully sealed. This selective inclusion helped readers suspend disbelief. Hogwarts wasn't in another dimension, it was just out of sight. You passed it on the train, missed it behind a warded spell, forgot it existed because someone cast a charm on your memory. It was fantasy in plain clothes. In the end, the real world and the wizarding world are separated by more than a brick wall in Diagon Alley. They're divided by how much, or how little, they are willing to change. Before we continue the video, if you are still watching, drop a like on the video and comment a potato emoji so I know who made it this far. Let's get back into it. When J.K. Rowling first sold Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone to Bloomsbury in 1996, she received a modest advance of £1,500, a small bet placed by a small publisher on a story read and loved by the chairman's 8-year-old daughter. No one, not even Rowling herself, could have imagined that within 2 decades, the world she created would evolve into one of the most valuable intellectual properties of all time, a franchise so profitable, so resilient, that it rivaled the likes of Star Wars, Marvel, and The Lord of the Rings in scope and reach. By the early 2000s, Harry Potter had already shattered every conventional benchmark in book publishing. The novels alone sold over 500 million copies worldwide, translated into more than 80 languages, and distributed in more than 200 countries. They became the best-selling book series in history, a distinction that remains unchallenged. But the revenue from book sales, while massive, was just the tip of the wand. The film rights, acquired by Warner Bros. In 1999 for a reported $1 to $2 million plus royalties, were the franchise's first major leap beyond publishing. From 2001 to 2011, the 8-film series grossed more than $7.7 billion at the global box office, making it, for a time, the highest-grossing movie franchise of all time until it was overtaken by the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Each installment became a cultural event, often the highest-grossing film of its release year. The studio's return on investment wasn't just from ticket sales. DVD and Blu-ray sales added billions more. The films became perpetual earners on streaming platforms, television syndication, and airline distribution. Behind the screen, they generated extensive licensing revenue for props, costumes, and soundtrack albums, even collectible editions of wands, broomsticks, and time-turners. Alongside the films came merchandise, which became an industry unto itself. From 2001 to the present, branded Harry Potter merchandise, toys, clothing, home goods, Lego sets, stationery, bedding, board games, has generated an estimated $7 to $10 billion in revenue. Every major retailer from Target to Hamleys, Hot Topic to Harrods, carried Potter goods. At its height, no child's birthday party was untouched by the series, themed cake toppers, party favors, invitations, robes. The books, films, and merchandise laid the groundwork, but it was the theme parks that transformed Harry Potter from literary IP to immersive megabrand. In 2010, Universal Orlando unveiled the Wizarding World of Harry Potter, a landmark in themed entertainment. The park offered visitors the chance to walk through Hogsmeade, dine at the Three Broomsticks, and ride a hyper-realistic broomstick coaster through the skies over Hogwarts. The attention to detail was astonishing. Every brick, every butterbeer, every interactive wand station was built with Rowling's approval. It was more than a ride, it was a pilgrimage. The success was immediate and overwhelming. Attendance at Universal Orlando surged by more than 30% within the first year. Similar parks followed in Japan, 2014, Hollywood, 2016, and Beijing, 2021. Together, the theme parks contributed billions in licensing and operating revenue, helped Universal compete directly with Disney, and made the Potter IP one of the rare properties capable of holding physical space in fans' imaginations and in actual geography. But the financial momentum didn't stop there. Rowling and Warner Brothers moved to expand the narrative universe with the Fantastic Beasts films. Though critically mixed, the first 3 installments grossed over $1.8 billion at the box office. A new streaming series, a planned Harry Potter TV adaptation announced by Warner Brothers Discovery in 2023, signals another major expansion, likely worth hundreds of millions over the next decade. Add to this the stage play, Harry Potter and the Cursed Child, which became a West End and Broadway blockbuster. With premium ticket pricing, high sell-through rates, and international productions, the play has generated over $250 million in box office revenue since opening in 2016, one of the most successful theatrical productions in modern history. In publishing, illustrated editions, collector's sets, new audiobooks, and companion guides continue to sell robustly, sometimes outselling new literary releases. Audible's Harry Potter audiobooks, narrated by Stephen Fry, UK, and Jim Dale, US, remain among the platform's most downloaded content every year, nearly 2 decades after the series concluded. Meanwhile, video games, once a side dish of the franchise, became headline assets. In 2023, Hogwarts Legacy, a sprawling open-world RPG, became a global bestseller, grossing over $1 billion within its first year of release. The game introduced the Wizarding World to a new generation of gamers, cementing the IP's cross-generational viability. Cumulatively, the Harry Potter franchise, including books, films, theme parks, games, merchandise, and live entertainment, has generated over $35 billion in global revenue since its inception. That number continues to grow. At the center of it all remains Rowling, who retained unusually strong control over her IP from the very beginning. She licensed, but never sold. She approved major adaptations. She retained rights to character names, spin-offs, and derivative works. This control not only preserved the integrity of the brand, it made her one of the wealthiest self-made authors in history, with personal net worth estimates ranging between $750 million and over $1 billion, depending on the source. Unlike many franchises where ownership is spread among stakeholders, Rowling's contract structure placed her at the apex of the Potter pyramid. As the sole creator and literary rights holder, she continues to earn royalties from every book, every reprint, every licensing deal. Her imprint, legally, creatively, financially, is woven into every strand of the brand. And yet, despite all the riches and records, the heart of the phenomenon has remained surprisingly simple. The biggest profits were not from toys or tickets. They were from books. Millions upon millions of people, across continents, cultures, and languages, bought and read a story. A story about a boy who didn't know he was a wizard. And that, in the end, is the rarest kind of financial success. One not built on gimmick or hype, but on pages turned and imaginations kindled. A reminder that sometimes, the most valuable magic is the one printed in ink. Long before Harry Potter became a cultural institution or a multi-billion-dollar franchise, he was something quieter, something rarer, a boy who made children read. When Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone was first released in 1997, it landed in a publishing world with conservative expectations about children's attention spans. The prevailing wisdom held that young readers, especially those between 8 and 12, would not sit through long books, much less ones that challenged them with complex characters, themes of mortality, and moral ambiguity. Publishers trimmed their word counts, simplified their vocabulary, and packaged literature in bite-sized formats designed to compete with video games and television. Then came Harry. Rowling's debut novel, over 76,000 words long, was anything but short. It demanded patience, imagination, and emotional maturity. And children devoured it. They finished it. Then they reread it. And they asked for more. By the time Goblet of Fire was released in 2000, its 636 pages were being read by 9- and 10-year-olds, not reluctantly, but urgently. Parents watched their children read undercovers with flashlights. Teachers reported that students who had never completed a book were suddenly finishing novels overnight. Libraries logged record circulation numbers. Booksellers sold out their entire stock within hours. It was a shift not just in reading behavior, but in reading culture. Children weren't reading because they were told to. They were reading because they wanted to know what happened next. Educators and literacy specialists took notice. Almost overnight, Harry Potter became a staple in classrooms. Teachers used the series to teach vocabulary, inferencing, character analysis, and thematic interpretation. Reading comprehension levels rose. ESL, English as a Second Language, instructors adapted the books into language programs. For many children learning English abroad, Harry Potter was their first full-length novel in a second language. What made the book so effective as literacy tools wasn't just their accessibility. It was their layered emotional and intellectual design. Rowling trusted children with serious content. She introduced moral complexity, Dumbledore's fallibility, Snape's double life, systemic injustice at the Ministry, without didacticism. She never talked down to her readers. In doing so, she raised their capacity to read not just for plot, but for meaning. In schools, entire classrooms were built around Hogwarts houses. Teachers sorted students into Gryffindor, Slytherin, Hufflepuff, and Ravenclaw as a behavior and reward system. Some schools hosted Quidditch tournaments, adapted for gym class. Others created cross-disciplinary units. Students might read Chamber of Secrets in English, study ancient runes in history, explore mythical beasts in science, and calculate potion measurements in math. The series became more than curriculum. It became community. In underfunded schools and economically disadvantaged districts, Harry Potter was a literacy lifeline. The books were donated en masse through library partnerships, non-profit literacy initiatives, and publishers' outreach programs. For children without access to private bookshelves, Harry was a friend on loan from a library cart, and often, their first encounter with long-form fiction. In hospitals and pediatric oncology wards, Rowling's books were stocked alongside blankets and 4 poles, offering worlds that children could retreat into during treatment. In 2001, Rowling co-authored Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them and Quidditch Through the Ages for Comic Relief, a UK charity. Proceeds from the books helped fund education and social justice programs around the globe. Within a month, they raised over £10 million. It was the beginning of Rowling's philanthropic focus on literacy and children's welfare. In 2005, she established Lumos, a non-profit dedicated to ending the institutionalization of children worldwide. Grounded in the belief that every child deserves a family, a voice, and an education. Despite the book's global reach, they were not without controversy in schools. In some districts in the United States and elsewhere, Harry Potter faced banning efforts. The most frequent accusation, that the books promoted witchcraft, the occult, or anti-Christian messages. Between 1999 and 2003, the series was frequently among the top 5 most challenged books in the American Library Association's annual reports. School boards debated them. Churches condemned them. Lawsuits were filed. But the backlash often backfired. The controversy drew more curiosity. Libraries held read-banned books events, with Harry Potter front and center. Teachers defended the series passionately, arguing that the books taught empathy, friendship, resilience, and the battle against tyranny, hardly satanic virtues. For many children raised in conservative or religious environments, reading Harry Potter became a quiet act of independence. Beyond literacy, the books also became tools for emotional education. Psychologists and child development experts praised the series for how it helped children articulate grief, loneliness, and anxiety. Children identified with Harry's trauma, the loss of parents, the weight of expectations, the feeling of being unseen or misunderstood. Teachers reported students using Harry's name as a way to talk about bullying, parental loss, even depression. In classrooms, Dumbledore's quotes were copied onto posters. The Mirror of Eris sparked journal reflections on longing and self-perception. The Dementors became a metaphor for depression long before Rowling confirmed the connection. "What's your Patronus?" became a coded way of asking someone what gave them hope. Even college campuses embraced the books not as relics of childhood, but as worthy of serious inquiry. Ivy League universities held Harry Potter conferences. Papers were published on magical ethics and the politics of magical law. A new field, Harry Potter studies, quietly emerged. And through it all, the books kept doing what they had always done best, turning non-readers into readers. That power, the simple, durable power of story, proved more transformative than any spell. The statistics told one version: increased vocabulary scores, longer reading retention, higher library usage. But the real legacy lived in moments. A child, afraid of being different, finding courage in Luna Lovegood. A student with dyslexia finishing Prisoner of Azkaban aloud with a reading partner. A group of shy fifth graders standing in front of the class, debating whether Snape was a hero. A worn copy of Order of the Phoenix passed hand to hand down a row of desks. A librarian unlocking the cabinet early on release day, just this once. The boy who lived became the boy who read. And behind him, he led millions more. The books ignited imaginations. The films gave them form. But it was the parks, the streets of Hogsmeade, the halls of Hogwarts, the clink of goblets in the Three Broomsticks, that made the magic real. For millions of fans, reading Harry Potter was more than escapism, it was a longing. A longing to go there, to sit in the Great Hall, to step onto platform 9 3/4, to choose a wand that chose them. The need to cross from fiction into the physical world was so profound that when Universal Studios partnered with Warner Brothers to build the wizarding world of Harry Potter, they weren't just constructing rides. They were answering a call. The project, greenlit in 2007 and opened in 2010 at Universal's Islands of Adventure in Orlando, was one of the most ambitious themed entertainment undertakings ever attempted. It wasn't just another park attraction tagged onto an existing franchise. It was a fully immersive land, layered with detail, built with reverence, and approved down to the texture of the stonework by Rowling herself. She wasn't interested in a commercialized fantasyland. She insisted that everything, from the shop signs in Hogsmeade to the recipes used in the Three Broomsticks, be authentic to the world she had created. She approved every butterbeer, every wand, every parchment label on every bottle in every window. Visitors didn't enter Harry Potter Land. They entered Harry's world. The first Wizarding World park in Orlando featured meticulously recreated locations: the Hogwarts Castle, c. Ooftarps, Ollivander's Wand Shop, where each visitor could experience a wand-choosing ceremony, and the Three Broomsticks, serving classic fare and chilled butterbeer, a frothy, sweet drink invented just for the parks but canonized by Rowling as the official taste of wizard childhood. The rides were not amusement park clichés. Harry Potter and the Forbidden Journey combined cutting-edge robotics, projection mapping, and practical effects to create an experience that simulated flying with Harry himself. Queue lines were attractions in themselves, winding through Dumbledore's office, defense against the dark arts classrooms, and corridors filled with talking portraits. Universal took a gamble. The park's footprint was massive. Its development budget reportedly exceeded $250 million. But the return on investment was staggering. Within the first year, attendance at Islands of Adventure soared by over 30%. Merchandise sales broke internal records. Fans wept upon entering, and the demand kept growing. In 2014, Universal expanded the experience with Diagon Alley, built in the neighboring Universal Studios Florida park. To connect the two, they created a working replica of the Hogwarts Express. Guests could travel between the two parks via the train, but only if they held a park-to-park ticket, a clever piece of magical upselling. The journey featured windows that transformed into moving scenes from the countryside or city, depending on the direction, and a few narrative surprises. Diagon Alley wasn't just immersive, it was alive. Nocturne Alley offered shadowy detours. Weasley's Wizard Wheezes sold trick sweets. Gringotts, now a ride, Escape from Gringotts, loomed with fire-breathing dragons and moving goblin tellers. Even the exchange kiosks let guests convert Muggle money into Gringotts banknotes. Other parks followed. Universal Studios Japan opened its Wizarding World in 2014, complete with a Japanese-language version of the attractions and subtle cultural localization. Universal Studios Hollywood unveiled its version in 2016. In 2021, Universal Studios Beijing opened with a Wizarding World as one of its central lands, again, carefully translated and localized with Rowling's approval. But it wasn't just rides and shops. It was ritual. Fans dressed in robes. They stood under Sorting Hat replicas. They dueled with interactive wands, park-exclusive items embedded with sensors that allowed them to cast spells at designated shop windows. Water would shoot. Troll armor would move. Flames would erupt. The wand wasn't just a souvenir. It was a passport. The success of the theme parks reshaped the very idea of fandom experience. Suddenly, fans could live their story. They could sip pumpkin juice beside a crackling magical hearth. They could hear moaning Myrtle in the bathroom. They could be part of a world that once lived only in text and imagination. But the immersion didn't stop there. In 2012, Warner Bros. Studios London launched the Making of Harry Potter Studio Tour in Leaves Den, on the original film sets. This wasn't a theme park, but a pilgrimage, a behind-the-scenes look at the filmmaking magic, complete with full-scale sets, prop rooms, creature workshops, and green-screen broomstick flights. For many fans, it was sacred ground. This was where the story had been made real. Later, pop-up exhibitions and traveling shows took the experience global, from New York to Singapore to Paris. Museum-quality displays of costumes, wands, animatronics, and handwritten scripts offered cultural legitimacy and cinematic wonder. And in 2023, a new evolution arrived, Harry Potter, the exhibition, an interactive touring installation featuring personalized digital experiences, wand pairings, trivia duels, and high-tech immersion. Blending theme park and museum into one. Each physical expansion, from Orlando to Osaka, London to Las Vegas, carried Rowling's fingerprints. Her creative control ensured that tone, authenticity, and respect for canon were preserved. She reportedly turned down multiple licensing offers for theme parks before Universal convinced her they could build something true. What resulted wasn't just merchandise. It was memory made solid. Fiction made space. The economics were staggering. Theme park revenue added billions to the Potter brand. Butterbeer alone was estimated to bring in more than $20 million per year in sales. Wand purchases averaged thousands per day at peak seasons. And ticket sales turned Harry Potter into one of Universal's most profitable verticals. But the legacy was more than fiscal. Children saw themselves reflected in moving mirrors. Adults rediscovered wonder. Grandparents passed down stories in line. Couples proposed in front of Hogwarts Castle, fireworks blooming above. Fans wept in the wand ceremony, where a young child, perhaps not yet born when the books were written, was chosen. It wasn't just Harry who lived. The world he left behind now lives, too, built in stone and spellwork, where the magic never ends at the last page. The story of Harry Potter began with paper, ink, and a delayed train. But by the 2010s, the world that once belonged to physical books and silver screens had transformed, pixel by pixel, into something new. Magic had gone digital. With the original book series complete and the final films behind them, fans turned to the internet not only to remember the wizarding world but to reconstruct it, through podcasts, theory videos, live TikToks, fan-made games, and expansive digital archives. For an entire generation raised on Harry Potter, the story was no longer something they consumed. It was something they produced. At the forefront of this evolution was YouTube, which became an incubator for the new generation of fan scholars and creative theorists. Channels like Super Carlin Brothers, launched in 2012 by brothers Jay and Ben Carlin, became digital libraries of speculation, analysis, and fan theory, uploading weekly videos that explored hidden clues in the books, alternate character motivations, and subtle bits of world-building missed by casual readers. With millions of views and a passionate community, their work helped keep the series alive through interactive discussion. They weren't alone. Theorists like Seamus Gorman, Moviflame, The Potter Collector, and others gained massive followings by examining everything from Dumbledore's master plans to deep dives into wand lore. Entire video essays were dedicated to asking questions Rowling never answered. Did Dobby really die a free elf? Could the prophecy have been avoided? Was the Sorting Hat actually biased? These videos weren't just entertainment, they were education. Many cited interviews, Pottermore entries, and obscure footnotes as evidence. The lines between literary analysis, speculation, and performance blurred beautifully. Then came TikTok, where a new generation of fans, and many of whom weren't alive when Philosopher's Stone was published, began discovering and reshaping the wizarding world through short-form video. Hashtags like #HarryPotterTalk, #DracoTalk, and #MaraudersTalk exploded in popularity. Teens role-played as Slytherins dueling in corridors. Cosplayers recreated the Yule Ball with Gen Z music and modern fashion. Entire subcultures bloomed around aesthetics, dark academia, Harry Potter, Hufflepunk, Slytherin girlcore. The platform's duetting function allowed fans to interact across timelines, reenacting scenes, writing alternate dialogues, or creating elaborate alternate universe, romances. Perhaps most notably, the Marauders era. Featuring James Potter, Sirius Black, Remus Lupin, Peter Pettigrew, and Lily Evans, took on a second life almost entirely outside of canon. With little more than hints from the books and Rowling's later comments, fans built a robust cultural mythology around these characters, full of angst, queer longing, betrayal, and rebellion. On TikTok and in fan fiction, the Marauders became icons, reinterpreted with the intimacy and emotional weight of a tragedy never written. Other platforms thrived as well. On Reddit, forums like ArtHFanfiction and Art Harry Potter became centers of debate, headcanon crafting, and fan-made world extensions. On Tumblr, fans created elaborate meta-essays and GIFs pairing book lines with visuals from unrelated films to evoke character nuance. On Instagram and Pinterest, fan art, ranging from hyper-realistic portraits to whimsical comic panels, reimagined characters of color, queer romances, and reinterpreted fashion. On Discord, roleplay servers and house-specific discussion hubs allowed fans to recreate Hogwarts digitally, complete with lesson plans and magical duels. Meanwhile, fan-made games began to flourish. Long before Hogwarts Legacy became a blockbuster title in 2023, Potter fans had already coded their own digital Hogwarts experiences. Hogwarts Mystery, an official mobile game launched in 2018, allowed users to experience Hogwarts in the 1980s, meeting younger versions of familiar characters. Witchcraft and Wizardry, a fan-made Minecraft server and mod project, recreated the entire wizarding world to scale, allowing players to walk through Diagon Alley, attend classes, and unlock storylines. The precision of these digital reconstructions, every stone of Hogwarts, every lantern in Hogsmeade, became a kind of fan architecture. Harry Potter fanfic RPGs appeared on platforms like Roblox and Gmod, often with complex, collaborative systems of house points, magical dueling, and character development. These creations weren't just games. They were acts of participatory storytelling. Fans weren't waiting for more content from Rowling or Warner Brothers, they were building their own. And they often did so with more inclusivity and creativity than official canon allowed. One particularly powerful trend was the reimagining of Hogwarts through a diverse lens. Fan artists and creators redrew the cast with racially diverse characters, reconsidered house stereotypes, and wrote stories centered on LGBTQ+ students at Hogwarts, deaf witches using wand signing, or neurodivergent Ravenclaws. These weren't just edits. They were declarations: this world can belong to all of us. In the digital age, Rowling's creation had grown beyond her. While she still retained full creative rights, the ownership of Harry Potter, emotionally and culturally, had diffused into the hands of the readers. The internet had democratized the wizarding world. Everyone with a camera, a sketchpad, or a Discord server could be a world builder. Magic, once found in chapters, now lived in comment sections. This digital explosion also allowed for critique. Many creators used their platforms to question the gaps in canon, from racial representation to the treatment of magical creatures. Discussions became more nuanced, less reverent, more communal. For a series built around challenging authority and rewriting broken systems, it was a fitting evolution. In this era, the wizarding world was no longer defined by 7 books or 8 films. It was a living, ever-updating constellation of art, analysis, storytelling, performance, and play. You didn't have to read the books in 1997 to love Harry Potter. You didn't even have to read them at all. Maybe you watched a Marauders edit on TikTok and fell in love with Sirius Black. Maybe you joined a Hufflepuff server in 2020 and made lifelong friends. Maybe your first magical experience was casting a spell in Minecraft, not on paper. It didn't matter how you got there. What mattered was that the story, reshaped, reframed, reborn, still welcomed you. For millions, the first time they saw Hogwarts was not on a page, but on a screen: the soaring stone towers, the candlelit Great Hall, the steam curling off the Hogwarts Express. And at the heart of that vision were the faces: Harry, Hermione, Ron, children who would grow up not just in fiction, but in front of our eyes. When Warner Brothers began casting for Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, they were not just filling roles. They were giving physical form to characters who lived in the minds of readers around the world. The task was daunting. The expectations, even in 2000, were immense. But somehow, lightning struck. Daniel Radcliffe, Emma Watson, and Rupert Grint became synonymous with Harry, Hermione, and Ron. They were unknowns when cast, ordinary British schoolchildren with no concept of what lay ahead. But over the next decade, they would become global icons. Not just actors, but emotional landmarks in the lives of an entire generation. The films succeeded not only because they stayed faithful to Rowling's source material, but because the cast inhabited their characters. Radcliffe captured Harry's quiet, watchful courage. Watson gave Hermione her fierce intellect and unflinching loyalty. Grint brought humor and heart to Ron's underdog arc. They didn't act as much as grow into their roles, and, over time, their roles grew into them. But the impact of the cast extended beyond the Golden Trio. Alan Rickman, who played Severus Snape, delivered a performance so layered, so restrained, that it redefined how many fans understood the character. Long before readers knew Snape's final truth, Rickman played him with a knowing melancholy. Rowling had, in fact, told him Snape's secret, that his love for Lily Potter was the driving force behind his loyalty, years before it was revealed in the books. Rickman carried that burden with quiet dignity until his death in 2016, after which fans flooded the internet with tributes, always. Maggie Smith, Minerva McGonagall, Robbie Coltrane, Hagrid, Richard Harris and later Michael Gambon, Dumbledore, Helena Bonham Carter, Bellatrix Lestrange, Tom Felton, Draco Malfoy, Ralph Fiennes, Voldemort, Evanna Lynch, Luna Lovegood, and many others brought nuance and texture to characters who could have easily become caricatures. Instead, they made them unforgettable. In interviews over the years, the cast often spoke of the tight bond they shared. The Harry Potter films were not filmed on a distant set and forgotten, they were a second childhood. They went to school together on set. They shared dressing rooms and first crushes. They celebrated birthdays in the Gryffindor common room between takes. It was, in many ways, a real-life Hogwarts, an insular world of lessons, losses, and extraordinary moments. When the films concluded in 2011, the emotional weight was palpable. Behind-the-scenes footage from the final days of filming shows the cast weeping in each other's arms, walking out of the Great Hall for the last time. The final scene, shot at King's Cross Station, mirrored the book's epilogue, but the tears were real. Post-Potter, the actors chose diverse paths. Daniel Radcliffe took bold risks in independent cinema and theatre, shedding the Harry image not through denial, but transformation, starring in roles ranging from a farting corpse, Swiss Army Man, to a young beat poet, Kill Your Darlings, to live performances of Equus and the lifespan of a fact. Through it all, he remained grounded, generous, and self-aware. Often using his fame to support LGBTQ+ rights, mental health awareness, and indie storytelling. Emma Watson, after attending Brown University, became a UN Women Goodwill Ambassador, launching the He for She campaign and using her platform to advocate for education, feminism, and sustainability. She continued to act, notably in The Perks of Being a Wallflower and Disney's Beauty and the Beast, but she also carefully curated her public presence, choosing substance over spotlight. Rupert Grint kept a lower profile, appearing in indie films and later in television series like Servant. He became a father. He opened a hotel. He remained beloved, the quiet heart of the trio who never sought headlines, only normalcy. Tom Felton, whose portrayal of Draco Malfoy won him a dedicated fanbase, leaned into his role as fandom ambassador. He frequently appeared at conventions, hosted cast reunions, and published a memoir, Beyond the Wand. That offered a raw, humble look at growing up in the shadow of wizardry. Fans embraced him as a bridge, part actor, part insider, part lifelong Slytherin. Evanna Lynch, who had been a fan before she was cast as Luna, became an advocate for mental health, eating disorder recovery, and animal rights. She remained deeply engaged with fans, always acknowledging her unique position as someone who crossed from reader to character. In 2022, the 20th anniversary HBO Max reunion special brought the surviving cast back together. There was laughter, tears, and visible reverence. Daniel, Emma, and Rupert hugged tightly. Felton and Lynch reflected on the years with clear affection. Footage of Rickman, Harris, and Coltrane played softly in tribute. Coltrane's words echoed through the credits, "I'll not be here, sadly, but Hagrid will." For fans, the actors were more than performers. They were companions, guides, and avatars through one of the most formative stories of their lives. The connection ran deep. At conventions, fans queued for hours to speak a single sentence, "Thank you for my childhood." They brought worn books, homemade wands, tears. The cast, in turn, embraced their place in the narrative. Even as some fans grappled with Rowling's evolving public image, their love for the cast and their characters remained largely untarnished. These actors had walked beside readers not just on screen, but in life. They had grown, struggled, laughed, and grieved in view of a world that loved them back. In the end, they did what all good actors do, they made the invisible visible. They gave us not just magic, but memory. In the beginning, it was just an idea. A whisper of a character on a delayed train. No fanfare. No lightning bolt. Just a woman without a pen and a boy who didn't yet know he was a wizard. What followed was not just a publishing success or a cultural moment. It was a transformation of reading, of childhood, of how we understand story itself. Harry Potter was not simply a series. It was a phenomenon that embedded itself into the emotional, intellectual, and moral fabric of an entire generation. And then another. It taught us that grief could be a beginning. That love could be armor. That the brave were not always loud, and the loyal not always first. That the most powerful spell was often a choice, to protect, to forgive, to resist. For J.K. Rowling, the series was a lifeline, born in poverty, drafted in cafes, molded by loss and resilience. For readers, it became a lighthouse, guiding them through the chaos of growing up, through fear and loneliness and the aching questions that define being human. The story said, over and over again, you are not alone. The numbers are vast, 500 million books sold, billions earned, dozens of languages, 8 films, 3 theme parks, countless fanfics, hundreds of podcasts. But the real impact isn't measurable. It lives in memories. A bedtime chapter under blankets. A midnight book launch with wand in hand. A first tattoo of a quote. A classroom of children whispering spells. The world Rowling built was specific, a castle in Scotland, cloaked in magic, but it became universal. Readers across continents, cultures, beliefs, and identities stepped through that brick wall at platform 9 3/4 and found a home. They found themselves in Hermione's hunger for justice, in Neville's quiet courage, in Lupin's shame and dignity, in Snape's contradictions, in Luna's luminous strangeness. And when the series ended, the story did not. It lived on, in fan creations, in academia, in classrooms, in social movements, in whispered headcanons and loudly rebuilt. That, too, is a kind of magic, to create something that can be argued with, and still loved. For Rowling, the post-series years were complex. She became both the guardian and the lightning rod of the world she created. Her control was immense. So was the scrutiny. Her legacy is now discussed with nuance and tension. But whatever the discourse, the books endure, their pages worn, their meanings carried into new hands. And for the readers, now older, some now parents, teachers, writers themselves, the boy who lived became something larger. He became the reminder of how stories save us. How they give shape to the intangible. How they grow with us, change with us, and, sometimes, outlast us. It's easy to think of Harry Potter as a fantasy story. Wands, spells, magical creatures. But its true spell is subtler. It told us that the greatest power was not in defeating death or controlling others. It was in choosing again, to love, to try, to stand, even when afraid. That is the legacy of Harry Potter. A story that, despite its ending, never really ended. A scar that never faded. A world that welcomed you, and still does. Always. The last page has been turned. The castle is still. The wands are at rest. The ink is dry. But somehow, it doesn't feel like the end. Perhaps that's because Harry Potter was never just a story. It was a ritual of waiting, of hoping, of finding something true inside something imagined. It was a tether between strangers who stood in line at midnight, between siblings who argued over house pride, between parents who read aloud with voices trembling at the words. The scar had not pained Harry for 19 years. Even now, as new generations discover the books in libraries, thrift stores, or gifted copies worn smooth by time, something ignites again. The old magic flickers to life. The journey begins anew. There will always be something unspoken in the bond shared between those who grew up under that spell. A look, a quote, a symbol carved on a backpack. It is a language without borders, one that speaks in patron uses, platform numbers, and the unmistakable comfort of belonging to a world you once believed in. The world will keep changing. Stories will come and go. But somewhere, always, there will be a child opening that first book, unaware that their life is about to change. They will meet a boy in a cupboard. And they, too, will understand what it means to find home in a story. So, let the halls of Hogwarts remain open, in memory, in imagination, in whatever new shape they take. Let the magic be passed on, not through spells, but through kindness, through curiosity, through the bravery to be better than the world expects. And if one day you happen to walk by a train platform, and you feel something stir just beyond the ordinary, a breeze, a whisper, a shimmer at the corner of your eye, don't be surprised. Some doors never fully close. And that brings us to the end of tonight's story. Thank you for spending this quiet time with me, for letting your mind wander through train stations, inked pages, candlelit castles, and the story behind the magic. If you learned something new tonight, maybe something about the publishing world, or the origins of the films, or even a little piece of fan history you'd never heard before, go ahead and gently tap that like button. It tells me you're enjoying these deeper dives, and it helps others find their way here, too. Now, before you drift off completely, I'll leave you with a soft little trivia question to sleep on. What was the very first spell Harry Potter successfully cast, intentionally or not, in the books? Think you know? Leave your guess in the comments, and I'll reveal the answer in the next video. And if you'd like more magical sleep stories, I think you'll really enjoy my Harry Potter Diary series, where we explore each year at Hogwarts, told from Harry's own quiet, personal perspective. 1 year, 1 voice, 1 night at a time. It's one of my favorite projects. So, whenever you're ready to return, the castle gates are always open. Until then, sleep well, dream deep, and remember, happiness can be found, even in the darkest of times, if one only remembers to turn on the light. Good night, my friend. Oh, you're still here? How lovely. Most people drift off long before now. But you stayed. You must be curious. Or maybe you're just a little more magical than most. Well, since you're still with me, I suppose I can tell you a little secret. Let me share with you the hidden lore of the Hogwarts Express. You ever think about this? Every student, Harry, Hermione, Tom Riddle, even Bellatrix Lestrange, they all took the same train. Same tracks. Same seats. Same red engine rolling through time like it's part of something bigger. But why a train? Why not brooms, or portkeys, or flue powder? Why enchant a muggle invention with magic so old it nearly tore a hole in the ministry? And how did the Hogwarts Express survive not just 1, but 2 dark wars, ghost hauntings, and magical sabotage that could have erased it from wizarding history completely? This isn't just a train. It's a relic. A vault of memories on rails. A spell you can ride. Before we dive in, pause a second. Where are you watching from, and what time is it right now? Seriously. Look at the clock. I want you to remember this moment, because something about this story is going to stay with you long after the video ends. In this video, we're unlocking the real origin of the Hogwarts Express. The secret ministry mission that built it, the ghosts that haunt it, the curses that nearly derailed it, and how the train itself might actually remember the students it carries. And before you get too comfy or drift off, hit like now to help more people find this story. Trust me, you're not going to want to forget what you hear today. Now grab your trunk. Watch the barrier. We're boarding the train that built a school, and maybe saved it. The year was 1827, and the wizarding world was in chaos. Every September, the Ministry of Magic found itself frantically dispatching obliviators across the British Isles, erasing the memories of Muggle bystanders who had witnessed inexplicable flashes of green fire erupting from chimneys, winged carriages weaving between clouds, or, on one especially disastrous occasion, a herd of centaur messengers galloping across the Yorkshire Dales carrying first-year's trunks. This was not how Albus Wintle, head of the Department of Magical Transportation, had envisioned the modern age of magical travel. His tea had gone cold again, untouched for the third time that morning, as he stared at the stack of parchment detailing transportation incidents from the latest Hogwarts intake. A portkey had gone off half a minute too early, sending 2 slithering girls spiraling into the underground cellars of Honeydukes. A Thestral-drawn carriage had overturned after a second year insisted on casting a levitation charm mid-flight. Worse yet, a young Muggle-born boy from Belfast had ended up trapped in a malfunctioning flue connection, spinning endlessly between 2 fireplaces in Glasgow. Wintle let out a long sigh and turned to his window. Diagon Alley bustled just beyond the soot streaked glass, but even its familiar cheer couldn't distract from the problem plaguing British wizardry. Hogwarts was simply too far, and too many children were arriving by far too many magical methods. In the adjacent office, Evangeline Orford, Senior Enchanter of Magical Innovations, was already drafting her proposal. Her quill moved in clean, precise strokes, sketching diagrams of locomotion runes and concealment charms that could render an entire train invisible to Muggles. She had long believed that if Muggles could move hundreds of passengers through countryside and city in a single machine of steel and steam, then wizards, surely, could do it better. And safer. But hers was a radical idea. Wizards distrusted Muggle inventions. Trains, to the average pureblood patriarch, reeked of soot, oil, and dangerous ideas. To place the transportation of the nation's wizarding children in the hands of a non-magical contraption was unthinkable to many. And yet, it was precisely that resistance Evangeline had prepared for. She stood now before the Wizengamot, facing a semicircle of robed figures who watched her with unreadable eyes. The courtroom thrummed with faint magic, the echoes of ancient enchantments clinging to the carved stone. "We are not suggesting integration with Muggle society," she said clearly, holding her scroll aloft. "We are proposing innovation under cover of enchantment. A self-contained, ministry-controlled, magically shielded railway system based on a Muggle engine, yes, but modified to the highest standards of magical concealment." A ripple of murmurs spread through the chamber. "Miss Orford," drawled Hezekiah Blackwood, a senior counsellor and known traditionalist, "are you honestly proposing that we herd our young into a smog-belching machine? The current alternatives involve flying hippogriffs and experimental broomstick cradles," she countered. "If safety is our priority, we must evolve." Silence. Then Wintle stepped forward. "We've tried patches. It's time we built a system." The decision was not unanimous, but it passed, barely. The experimental project was greenlit, under one condition: complete secrecy. The Muggle government could know nothing. Not even the train engineers. Construction began under the pretense of a private rail company. The site was chosen for its remoteness, a valley near Crewe, shrouded in natural fog and laced with protective enchantments dating back to Druidic times. Here, Muggle workers assembled the body of the train, supervised discreetly by witches and wizards under Polyjuice potion. At night, the magical team worked their enchantments. Runes of expansion were etched beneath floorboards to accommodate shifting corridors. Displacement charms bent geography, allowing the train to reach a castle in the Scottish Highlands within hours. And at the train's very heart, a magically reinforced boiler hummed with phoenix feather embers and an ancient stabilizing spell whispered into its casing by unspeakables from the Department of Mysteries. The train was unlike anything the wizarding world had seen. It gleamed deep crimson beneath its spells, its sides polished to a mirror-like finish that shimmered under the wand light. It had 12 compartments per carriage, a sweet trolley charm to never run out, and a subtle enchantment that caused time to bend slightly within, enough that even latecomers would never miss the start of the term. But the greatest secret of all was platform 9 3/4. Orford, ever the innovator, devised the platform as a meeting point between magical and muggle realities. Hiding in plain sight at King's Cross, it could be accessed only by wizards who walked through the barrier with intent. To muggles, it was just an ordinary wall. To witches and wizards, it became a gateway to a new age. The platform opened on August 31st, 1838. The train stood waiting. It emitted no steam, no screech of iron on track, only a soft hum of magic held in perfect tension. Orford stood beside it, her black robes catching the rising breeze, her face calm despite the skeptical whispers gathering behind her. The first group of students appeared through the barrier. A boy with flaming red hair dragged a battered trunk. A girl clutched a cat to her chest. Then more followed. Eyes widened. Smiles formed. Skepticism faded into awe. By evening, as the sun dipped behind King's Cross, the Hogwarts Express had made its first journey north. Far in the Highlands, the staff of Hogwarts waited at Hogsmeade Station, unsure what to expect. But the train arrived on time, smooth, silent, and perfect. Headmaster Sylvanus Kettleburn, then only a young Transfiguration professor, watched the students disembark. "So," he whispered, brushing soot from his sleeve, "this is the future." Behind him, Headmistress Millicent Blore nodded. No more broken brooms. No more disapparated knees. Just children. Safe. But not everyone rejoiced. Deep in Wiltshire, at the estate of House Rosier, a letter was crumpled in fury. And in a smoky London tavern, a man known only as Art swore he would never let his bloodline set foot on that muggle-born monstrosity. The Hogwarts Express, though born in hope, would ride the rails of resistance for decades to come. And yet, it endured. As the engine's first magical steam rose above the chimney and vanished into the night, a new era of wizarding travel had begun, one of steel, spellcraft, and stories that would echo through generations. By spring of 1838, the muggle-built shell of the train sat complete in a secluded yard outside Crewe. The air around it shimmered with layered protective enchantments, each woven so tightly that time itself seemed to move more slowly inside its bounds. What had begun as a sketch on Evangeline Orford's desk had become a gleaming crimson giant, a prototype muggle steam engine awaiting a soul. But what Orford and the Ministry had constructed was not yet a Hogwarts Express. It was still a shell, a marvel of muggle engineering, yes, but inert. Lifeless. What it needed now was enchantment, and that meant drawing on magic far older and more unpredictable than many dared to channel. They called in the unspeakables. Not even Wintle knew the full names of the men and women who arrived that June under cover of night, shrouded in robes of storm-cloud grey. The head of the team was a tall, androgynous figure with silver-threaded gloves and no visible wand. They carried a black scroll tube and spoke only once, "Where is the heart?" It was Orford who led them to the boiler. The enchantment would require 3 full nights, conducted under the solstice moon. It was a rite lost to time, revived only through fragmented records kept deep in the Department of Mysteries. The core of it was the Vinculum Arcanum, a binding spell used only on magical artifacts intended to outlive their creators. It required a nexus of ley lines, a vessel of intent, and a source of primal magic. They had the ley lines. Crewe stood on a confluence older than Roman Britain. They had the vessel, the train itself, a thing forged from iron, fire, and intention. But the primal magic? A phoenix feather. Donated, reluctantly, by a bird that had once belonged to a young Albus Dumbledore's ancestor, Persephone Dumbledore, an eccentric transfiguration theorist. The feather was suspended in a sphere of crystal above the engine's core, wrapped in a protective shell of shimmering charms. At midnight, the ritual began. From the scroll tube came words not spoken in 1,000 years. They echoed off steel and stone, making even the Muggle rails vibrate faintly. The unspeakable stood in a wide circle, wands drawn in silence. The train glowed red, then gold, then violet as magical circuits engraved beneath the plating surged to life. The vinculum took hold. For one impossible moment, the train screamed, not aloud, but in the magical ether, a high-pitched ripple that made every wand in a 5-mile radius hum. Its voice joined the world's hidden song. Wizards in faraway towns woke from sleep. Centaurs in the Forbidden Forest turned their ears toward the north. The Hogwarts Express had become more than metal. It had memory. But the enchantments were not purely functional. Orford and her team laced the train with spells for comfort and protection. The carriages bore expansion charms and self-cleaning hexes. Enchanted trolleys stocked with sweets would refill with a flick of the conductor's wand. Windows showed not just the outside but also illusions of fine weather, even during storms. More importantly, safety spells were layered like lacquer. Temporal cushioning, a mild distortion field, made collisions nearly impossible, subtly bending time around potential disasters. Cloaking wards prevented Muggle detection even at close range, redirecting notice like water off an umbrella. Compartmentalized protection rooms, each carriage could seal itself independently in case of an attack or malfunction. Every enchantment was reinforced with a memory anchor, a magical safeguard to ensure the train would remember its state and self-correct if damaged. Finally, the naming. It was Wintle, of all people, who wrote the name across the engine side with his wand, Hogwarts Express. The letters shimmered briefly, then settled into gold-lined serif script. The train seemed to inhale deeply. A rush of warm air hissed from its vents. "That's it," murmured Orford, her voice shaking. "It's alive." Still, there remained one final test: concealment within the Muggle world. The train needed to appear nowhere on paper and everywhere by magical intent. The Ministry's Misuse of Muggle Artifacts Office collaborated with the Department of Magical Transportation to embed the entire train with displacement glyphs, spells that would allow the train to exist within invisible space. It would operate on Muggle rails, but Muggles would never see it, hear it, or remember it had passed. The greatest triumph, though, came from Orford herself, the platform convergence charm. Inspired by her extensive research into spatial magic, Orford created the spell that would make platform 9 3/4 viable. It was not simply a platform, it was a liminal gateway, a magical crease between Muggle and wizarding realities. The wall at King's Cross became the scene. Crossing through with intent would fold the world slightly, slipping the traveler between the folds like a letter in an envelope. To test it, Orford herself sprinted into the wall between platforms 9 and 10 one rainy morning in late July. She disappeared. Wintle nearly fainted. Then she reappeared seconds later, smiling and soaked with magical condensation. "It works," she said. And it did. By August, the train was ready. Hogwarts faculty visited in secrecy, inspecting the compartments and noting the spell work. Professor Septimus Kettleburn suggested installing a small enchanted compartment for creatures and pets. Professor Mereable Thistlethwaite tested every charm, her spectacles fogging with delight. And on August 31st, the Hogwarts Express rolled for the first time from its hidden chamber into the magical fold of platform 9 3/4. It whistled, not with steam, but with a magical resonance tuned specifically to the frequency of the Hogwarts wards. It was both a call and a promise: the school would be ready. That night, Orford sat alone in the engine compartment, her hand resting on the now cool crystal housing the phoenix feather. The cabin glowed faintly, more alive than ever. She whispered, "Carry them well." And the train, in its way, seemed to answer, its lights flickering in quiet acknowledgement. The morning of September 1st, 1839, dawned cool and mist-laden, the skies over London heavy with the scent of damp cobblestones and soot. Beneath King's Cross Station, veiled between the bustle of Muggle commuters and ironclad locomotives, a marvel of magical engineering waited in perfect stillness, the Hogwarts Express. Platform 9 3/4 was hidden in plain sight, its shimmering boundary humming faintly as ministry officials, cloaked in civilian garb, patrolled the station. Above the roar of Muggle trains and the clatter of luggage trolleys, the air on the magical platform was tense with expectation. Evangeline Orford stood at the foot of the train, her ministry robes pristine, her expression unreadable. She held a clipboard, though she scarcely looked at it, her eyes fixed on the barrier as the first wave of students approached. From the Muggle side, they appeared to vanish into the stone wall, one by one, pairs of parents and children hurtling through the hidden seam in reality. From the magical side, they emerged with laughter, surprise, and wide-eyed wonder. The crimson engine loomed before them, its polished sides glinting in the morning haze, letters inlaid in gold, Hogwarts Express. The magical train, now thrumming with dormant energy, exhaled a slow hiss of warm, perfumed steam as the children boarded. Wizards and witches clustered in quiet awe. For most, this was their first glimpse of the enchanted marvel whispered about in the Daily Prophet and discussed in hushed tones in tea parlors and apothecaries. For others, particularly those with pure-blood heritage, it was a bitter pill, a symbol of unnecessary mingling with Muggle technology. Among the latter stood Alistair Black, his expression sharp beneath a black bowler hat, arms crossed as his young cousin prepared to board. "This is folly," he muttered to no one in particular. "A Muggle engine dressed in spells. My ancestors travelled by enchanted galleon through the sky, not in iron coffins." The conductor, a squat, cheerful wizard named Grimble Bunch, blew a gleaming brass whistle. It sang a single, high-pitched note across the platform, and the doors to the carriages slid open with an audible click. The students, ranging from wide-eyed first years to smug fourth years, scrambled aboard with chatter and dragging trunks. At 10:56 a.m., the doors closed. At 10:59 a.m., steam hissed softly from beneath the engine. And at 11 a.m. sharp, the Hogwarts Express rolled forward for the first time. Inside, the ride was like nothing the children, or their families, had ever experienced. The carriages were warm and brightly lit, charmed to smell faintly of cinnamon and parchment. The seats cushioned themselves to each passenger. Charms whispered around the ceiling created subtle skies, reflecting the countryside's passage in soft magical illusion. In the third carriage, a nervous Muggle-born named Gregory Fensworth sat wide-eyed beside a half-blood girl who explained that the trolley would soon arrive with all the best sweets, chocolate frogs that jump, you'll see. She was right. The trolley which came down the aisle with a smile as wide as her hat, distributing confections in exchange for sickles and nuts with mechanical grace. But not everything was well. At the halfway point, just as the train curved along a bend near the Peak District, the ambient hum of magic faltered. A shudder passed through the train. Inside the engine compartment, Grimble Bunch blinked as the pressure gauges fluctuated. Then came the shriek. It wasn't mechanical. It was magical. An echo in the ether. Something was interfering with the train's ley line stabilizers. Alarms activated, an ancient bell began to toll rhythmically through the compartments. Runes etched into the windows pulsed red. In the distance, a dark shimmer spread across the tracks like spilled ink. A curse lay directly across the rails. Someone had tampered with the route. Back at the ministry, warning glyphs flared to life on Evangeline Orford's wall. She didn't wait for orders. Apparating to the scene, alongside 3 Aurors and a retired Professor Marchbanks, she arrived on a bluff overlooking the train just as the disturbance came into full view. Standing on the opposing track, arms outstretched, was Alistair Black, his wand pointed directly at the rails. Ancient curses spiraled from his fingers, obscurus-rooted magic meant to displace magical objects from space. He meant to vanish the train mid-motion. He never got the chance. Professor Hortensia Marchbanks, small and stern, stepped forward from behind a thicket of brambles, lifting her wand without a word. A spiral of flame, phoenix-shaped and searing white, burst from her wand. Alistair shouted, ducked, but the curse was deflected. He was disarmed and stunned before he could cast again. A moment later, Orford raised both hands and spoke the Ancorus Maxima, the emergency stabilizer charm woven into the engine's binding spells. It pulsed through the ground like a heartbeat, and the Hogwarts Express shuddered, but did not derail. The ley lines adjusted, rerouted by magic older than any blood feud. The train surged forward once more, restabilized. The children inside never knew how close they'd come. That evening, as the express pulled into Hogsmeade Station, the sky above burned gold with late summer sun. Hogwarts Castle loomed. Cart had changed into a buffet of roast chicken and treacle tart for no reason at all. They laughed, jostled, smiled. Headmistress Millicent Blore, flanked by Professors Kettleburn and Thistlethwaite, watched as each child stepped onto the platform. The express, she whispered to herself, has earned its name. Behind her, Orford arrived quietly, having taken a private flue to the station. Her robes were scorched at the edges. Her wand hand trembled. But when she saw the train, intact, breathing its low magical hum, she allowed herself a rare smile. Carry them well, she repeated. And the train, as if listening, gave a low, sonorous whistle. A sound like memory and magic. Like a promise kept. The year was 1892, and the Hogwarts Express was now a fixture of magical life. Generations of witches and wizards had boarded its warm compartments and watched the Muggle world fade into the countryside, enchanted trolleys rattling past with promises of pumpkin pasties and cauldron cakes. It was tradition. It was comfort. It was safe. So when the dining car door slammed shut on its own, and stayed locked for the entire journey on the 1st of September, it sparked more than curiosity. It sparked fear. It began with fog. Not the gentle wisps common on Highland mornings, but a dense, unearthly fog that seeped in through the cracks of the train's ornate windows, curling around boots and swirling across compartments like ink dropped in water. In Carriage 7, a Ravenclaw fifth-year named Agnes Blythe looked up from her copy of Magical Mechanisms of the Modern Era and frowned. Did the wards drop? She asked aloud, but her classmates only shrugged. In the next compartment, a first-year Muggle-born named Daisy Pindlehook watched with wide eyes as her chocolate frog leapt from its wrapper and vanished mid-air. A moment later, the room grew cold. Very cold. Conductor Grimble Bunch, now older, heavier, and with eyebrows like runaway broom bristles, sat in the engine cabin sipping tea. When the lanterns in the dining car flickered, he stood, scowling, and took up his wand. Not again, he muttered. Not you. He trudged down the corridor toward the dining car, his boots echoing in the strangely quiet passage. The windows along the corridor shimmered with condensation despite the dry weather outside. He reached the ornate double doors of the dining carriage and knocked twice. Nothing. He tried the handle. It didn't budge. With a sigh, he pointed his wand and muttered, Alahomora. Still nothing. Then a voice drifted from within, whispery, off-key, and distinctly cheerful. Tickets, please. All aboard, don't forget the dining car delights, oh, sticky tarts and treacle fright. Bunch froze. He recognized the voice. Thaddeus? He called. A groan of iron answered him, followed by the slow creak of hinges, ancient, aching, unwilling. The doors opened. Inside, the dining car had changed. The usual warm mahogany tables and red velvet booths were replaced by long banquet tables covered in cobwebbed platters of long-rotted food. Silverware floated in the air, spinning gently. Candles hovered over each table, flames burning blue. And at the far end of the car, standing tall in spectral grey, was a ghostly figure in a tattered conductor's uniform. Thaddeus Thimble. He was pale, thin, and shimmered faintly. His mustache curled like a question mark. His conductor's cap sat slightly askew, and one ghostly hand clutched an old puncher, worn from centuries of phantom use. "Ah," Thaddeus said, smiling. "A guest?" Thaddeus Thimble had been the original assistant conductor of the Hogwarts Express, a cheerful, obsessive man who had insisted on checking every single ticket personally, even when the number of students grew to several hundred. He had died on board the Express in 1857 during a freak magical lightning storm over Loch Shiel, struck while protecting a group of second years from a ruptured containment rune. He had died a hero. But unlike most, Thaddeus had not moved on. He had refused to disembark. For years after his death, he'd been absent. Until now. "Thaddeus, this is not the time," Grimald said, stepping into the eerie car, wand at the ready. "You're frightening the students." Thaddeus tilted his translucent head. "But the train, she remembers me. She called me back." "She didn't," Grimald said gently. "You came of your own." "You're welcome, but this," he gestured around at the cold, the fog, the floating utensils. "This is no way to announce yourself." A pause. Then Thaddeus blinked. "I thought it would be festive." The train gave a sudden lurch. In carriage 3, a Gryffindor fourth year named Elias Merriweather spilled pumpkin juice all over his robes and yelled, "Oi!" What was that? Agnes Blythe, always ready, stood. "Spectral displacement," she murmured. "The ghost is integrated into the core wards now. We're sharing magical pressure." Back in the dining car, the temperature dropped again. Grimble took a step forward. "Thaddeus," he said slowly, "do you want to stay?" The ghost considered. "I never left." "Then stay. But do it properly." Thaddeus nodded solemnly, and with a wave of his ghostly hand, the rotting platters vanished. The blue candle flames warmed into golden glow. The tables reappeared, clean and set. Even the cobwebs folded into nothingness like paper in firelight. The fog dispersed. And Thaddeus Thimble took his place beside the trolley which, holding out his ancient puncher and beaming with pride. "Tickets, please," he whispered. The news of the haunting spread quickly through the school, and by October, students looked forward to seeing old Thimble at the start of each journey. Some claimed he could predict what house a first year would be sorted into just by glancing at their trunk. Others said he whispered advice, avoid the third-floor corridor this term, or shared stories of the train's hidden compartments. Professor Marchbanks returned to inspect the magical integration and declared, with a sniff, "Well, as long as he's helpful." The ministry considered removing him but ultimately ruled that so long as he causes no spectral disruptions or emotional trauma, he could remain as honorary conductor emeritus. Thaddeus Thimble's presence became part of Hogwarts lore. He never left the train, not even during the summer months. Some said he spent those days polishing spectral railings or whispering jokes into the firebox, keeping the magic alive. And every September 1st, when the lanterns flickered just before departure, a faint, familiar voice would echo down the carriages. "All aboard, the Hogwarts Express." The autumn of 1942 arrived with an unnatural stillness in the wizarding world. Far beyond the protective charms of Hogwarts and the invisible rails of the Hogwarts Express, shadows lengthened. Across Europe, Grindel's name was no longer spoken with fear, it was spoken with reverence by his followers and dread by the rest. Wizarding families whispered of disappearances, betrayals, and alignments once thought impossible. In Britain, the ministry walked a tightrope. Officially, it denounced Grindald. Unofficially, it feared provoking him. Yet through it all, one constant remained: the Hogwarts Express continued to run. It was not without risk. The train, once a marvel of innocence and exploration, had become a target. Not by Grindal directly, but by sympathizers within the Isles, radical pureblood supremacists and disillusioned magical theorists who believed Hogwarts should only educate the worthy. They viewed the train as a symbol of inclusivity. The great crimson equalizer that carried Muggleborns and purebloods alike in the same carriages, with the same sweets, and the same warm steam drifting from its enchanted chimney. So they plotted. They cursed sections of track. They released Confundus-charmed manticores onto the lines near Inverness. They tried, repeatedly, to disrupt the journey. But the Express endured. Thanks to the work of unsung heroes. One such hero was a fourth-year Hufflepuff named Elias Dawlish, half-blood son of a Muggle mechanic and a Ravenclaw curse-breaker. Quiet, bookish, and awkward, Elias had an unusual affinity for wards, especially magical patterns based on Muggle circuitry, something he'd studied obsessively from his father's engineering journals. On September 1, 1942, Elias was seated in carriage 8 when the train jolted to a halt in the Cairngorms, far earlier than it should have. The lights flickered. Windows fogged. Something was wrong. Outside, grey shadows coalesced along the tree line. Not creatures, but humans, hooded, wand-bearing, and cloaked in the black sigils of Grindald's ideology. The train's protective wards held, but barely. The attackers weren't trying to board. They were casting anchoring hexes, binding the train to the earth, draining it of its speed and protection like sap from a tree. Inside, panic spread. Everyone back from the windows, shouted a prefect. Wands appeared. Younger students huddled under seats. The trolley witch, older now, face-pinched with fear, pressed her palm against the dining car's hidden compartment, activating a defensive shield that flickered blue across the windows. Elias Dawlish, heart-pounding, ignored the chaos. He dropped to the floor, opened his enchanted toolkit, and pried open a small brass panel beneath his seat, the emergency rune manifold. It was supposed to be accessed only by ministry personnel. But Elias had studied the diagrams. He knew the magical logic of the Hogwarts Express. While outside hexes cracked the outer shell of the train's charmwork, he reached inside the manifold and laid his hand across the core glyph, Repulsio Magnus. It had been dormant for decades, an emergency failsafe designed to eject magical interference using a pulse of compressed magical force. He whispered, "Sir, get Ignis." The glyph flared. A burst of invisible energy exploded outward from the train, invisible but ferocious. The hex lines cracked. The attackers stumbled. Their cloaking charms disintegrated. One dropped their wand. Another disapparated mid-fall. Inside, the lights returned. The train began to move again. Elias collapsed backward, exhausted but grinning. He never took credit. But by the time they reached Hogsmeade Station, the word had spread. And though the ministry covered it up, calling it a minor weather anomaly, the students knew. And Hogwarts awarded him a Medal of Magical Merit at term's end. That incident was one of many. In 1944, a Dementor swarm crossed the rails near Fort William. The train, thanks to wards renewed by Professors Dippet and Dumbledore, withstood their chilling presence. A trio of sixth-year Gryffindors cast simultaneous patronuses from opposite carriages, forming a protective corridor of silver mist. In 1945, during the Battle of Nurmengard, the Hogwarts Express was rerouted through Wales for the first time in its history. Its journey slowed but never stopped. A Muggle-born girl from Cardiff later wrote in her diary, "The train felt sad that day. like it knew something big had ended. But also, like it was proud. In those years, the express became more than transport. It became sanctuary. Headmaster Dipet began a tradition of greeting students at the station personally. The train staff added extra compartments for privacy, counseling, even, briefly, a traveling gallery for students worried about families abroad. And within the walls of the carriages, something else stirred. A consciousness? Perhaps it was the cumulative effect of years of protective enchantments, or the presence of so many powerful emotions, fear, hope, laughter, loss, but the Hogwarts Express developed a quiet sentience. It adjusted the temperature if a child was crying, shifted windows to show more peaceful landscapes. On rare occasions, it would subtly extend the journey by a few minutes, as if giving a nervous first year more time to prepare. No spell caused this. It simply happened. A testament to the magic of place, memory, and purpose. By the end of the war, the Express had earned a new nickname among students. The Red Sanctuary. In a world that had torn itself apart with ideology, blood, and betrayal, it remained a steel promise winding through moors and hills: you are not alone. You are going home. And the train never forgot. The station was noisier than usual. King's Cross, ever humming with Muggle chaos, seemed especially frantic on the morning of September 1st, 1991. Children shouted. Trolleys rattled. Steam hissed from iron beasts bound for far more ordinary destinations. The Great Hall buzzed with mundane movement, but not on platform 9 3/4. There, behind the concealed stone barrier, an ancient presence stirred. The Hogwarts Express, crimson and gleaming, waited with ageless patience. The train had, over the years, acquired the weight and warmth of identity, was more than bolts and enchantments. She remembered voices, feet pounding down corridors, the weight of trunks filled with spellbooks and secrets. She remembered the war. She remembered fire. But today, she felt something different. Something unfamiliar. A presence like a spark, barely restrained. Trembling magic, pure and raw, walked through the barrier and onto her platform. A boy, thin, pale, clad in oversized Muggle clothes, dragging a trunk far too large for his frame. The train noticed him the way a tree might notice lightning approaching, drawn, uneasy, alert. Harry Potter. She didn't know his name, not yet. But she recognized what he carried. The boy looked around in awe, his green eyes wide with wonder. Behind him, a red-haired boy shouted something to his mother, and a moment later, a whole crowd of Weasleys spilled onto the platform like warmth and chaos in human form. Harry watched them, tentative, hesitant. The train watched him. It had seen orphan children before. Seen the lonely, the proud, the terrified. But never one like this, scarred in ways deeper than the lightning bolt on his forehead. She could feel it. The echo of curses not entirely faded. A lingering darkness pressed into his very bones. When he stepped into the corridor of carriage 5, the temperature adjusted by 1/2 degree. Subtle, just enough to ease the tension from his shoulders. Not magic cast, but magic remembered, a gift the train had learned to give. He walked slowly, staring at the polished wood, the enchanted windows, the compartment doors with golden handles. Behind him, the Weasley twins chattered. A girl with bushy brown hair asked if the trolley carried ginger newts. Somewhere, Thaddeus Thimble passed through a wall humming a cauldron full of hot, strong love. And then, "Can I sit here?" A red-haired boy, freckled and awkward, stood at Harry's compartment door. Harry hesitated. Sure. The Express, observing quietly, shivered with certainty. This mattered. As the train pulled away from the station, the gentle chug of her enchanted engine echoing through brick and mist, the journey began. not just for the children, but for something far larger. The world shifted slightly on its axis. Inside the compartment, Harry and Ron Weasley fell into easy conversation. The train listened. They spoke of chocolate frogs and famous witches' cards. They compared hand-me-down robes and spellbooks, marveling at the unknown. When Hermione Granger entered later, eyes bright and voice quick, the train noted the rhythm change. Like a new harmony added to an old song. She was the kind of child who asked questions of the windows, who tried to trace the enchantments in the ceiling paneling. When Neville Longbottom wandered in, asking about a lost toad, the train offered a faint magical nudge, guiding him toward kindness, pushing their paths closer. It had done this for decades. Gently. Unseen. As the train crossed into Scotland, winding past locks and over enchanted viaducts, the express allowed itself a rare indulgence. It remembered. It remembered James Potter and Sirius Black, laughing in Carriage 9. It remembered Lily Evans, reading aloud to a nervous first year beside her. It remembered Severus Snape, silent and fuming, staring out a window at clouds that mirrored his heart. It remembered Albus Dumbledore, once just a professor, sitting briefly in the front engine on a cold December night, his breath steaming with quiet thoughts. And now, here was Harry, a legacy child, a prophecy in motion. But still, just a boy, eating his first cauldron cake, laughing at a spell gone wrong, staring out the window in wonder. As dusk approached, the towers of Hogwarts crested the northern hills. The train whistled, not the usual note, but a softer tone, tuned precisely to the heart of the ancient wards guarding the castle. It was a greeting. A signal. Prepare. He is coming. Inside, the students leaned toward the windows, eyes wide. The express slowed as it neared Hogsmeade Station. Lanterns lit themselves. A gentle heating charm bloomed through the carriages, warding off the Highland chill. When Harry stepped off the train, his boot touched the stone platform, and the magic of the castle reached for him. He didn't know it. Couldn't feel it. But the express did. As the doors closed and the train began its slow return to dormancy, she exhaled once, a plume of golden steam rising to the stars. A memory added itself to her metal bones. A boy with a scar. The one who came quietly and would change everything. A memory added itself to her metal bones. A boy with a scar. The one who came quietly and would change everything. But even as Harry's footsteps echoed off the stone platform, the express did not let go of the moment. She lingered in presence, her frame cooling, her magic dimming, her wheels slowly ceasing their roll. This pause, brief and unnoticed by students, was her private ritual. A holding of breath, of memory, of meaning. The platform emptied quickly. Luggage was whisked into enchanted carts. First years were guided by a half-giant who smelled of earth and kindness. The others marched toward carriages pulled by beasts not yet visible to their young eyes. And still the express watched. She felt it, the echo of prophecy clinging to Harry's robes like invisible mist. But prophecy was not her language. She dealt in moments, in weight and warmth and the unspoken language of transition. The first tears of a homesick 11-year-old. The breathless kiss behind a fogged window. The silence of loss carried on return trips after war. Harry's presence had added a new note to her song, a quiet thread of inevitability that hummed against her walls long after he was gone. In the engine room, the last of the glowing embers within the magical firebox dimmed. A faint echo of phoenix feather warmth faded to amber. The control panel runes slid into dormancy, their light sinking into the brass plates like fireflies retreating for the night. Outside, the mist deepened. The Hogwarts Express was alone again. But not lonely. Inside carriage 5, still scented faintly of treacle and peppermint, something curious occurred. A chocolate frog card, forgotten on the windowsill, began to flutter. Not from wind. From resonance. The portrait of Albus Dumbledore inside glanced up, as if he too had noticed the shift. His eyes met the train window. "Ah," he whispered. "So it's begun." And then he winked, yes, quite definitely winked. And vanished from the card, leave. The safe, flickering lanterns. And now, added to that vast tapestry of memory, a lonely boy's small smile as he shared his very first pumpkin pasty. A red-haired boy's eager talk of chess and family and spells he hadn't yet mastered. A girl's curious eyes cataloguing magic with awe and longing. A soft-spoken child who'd lost a toad and found, instead, connection. Small things. Beautiful things. That was how legends began. By midnight, the Express had tucked herself away in her hidden siding, miles beyond Hogsmeade, wrapped in fog and memory. Her tracks shimmered faintly, cooled by enchantment, encircled by wards so old their rooms had grown into the trees. She slept. But not deeply. In her slumber, she dreamed. Of red steam and golden light. Of children laughing. Of a boy with a scar. And of the moment, inevitable and immense, when she would carry him again. Years from now. Wounded. Changed. But returning. She would carry him to battle. She would carry him to hope. She would carry them all. Because that was her promise. Her purpose. The Hogwarts Express did not just carry students. She carried generations. She carried the future. It had been 1 year since the Battle of Hogwarts. The castle had been rebuilt. The Forbidden Forest had healed. The Ministry had purged itself of corruption, slowly, painfully. But the scars remained. And yet, on the 1st of September, 1999, Platform 9 3/4 once again thrummed with life. The Hogwarts Express stood waiting, her paint freshly polished, her brass fittings glinting beneath morning sun. She whistled once, softly, like a sigh, and opened her doors. She was ready. Children swarmed the platform, some laughing, others weeping, some wide-eyed and clinging to parents' hands. New names. New houses. New fears. But the rhythm was familiar. Some, though, were not new. Among the crowd walked Professor Minerva McGonagall, clad in emerald green, her expression stern but softened by a rare smile. She paused at the train's engine, one hand brushing against its warm metal as though greeting an old friend. "You're still here," she whispered. The train gave a low hum in response. She turned as a voice rang out. "You're talking to it too, then?" Luna Lovegood, dreamy-eyed and now working with the Department of Magical Creatures, approached, a satchel of scrolls on one shoulder and a pair of charmed spectacles perched atop her head. "I believe it's semi-conscious," Luna said calmly, peering into the chimney with interest. "There are traces of ancient ley-bound runes I've never seen elsewhere. I think it runs on a combination of phoenix memory and ambient childlike wonder." McGonagall raised an eyebrow. "I was just saying hello." "Ah. Well. It remembers you." A special ceremony had been organized for this particular ride. The Ministry, eager to honor the centennial-plus legacy of the Hogwarts Express, had invited veterans, professors, and magical historians for a commemorative departure. Journalists milled about, snapping pictures. A plaque was unveiled on the platform's stone wall. "Steel and Memory, the Hogwarts Express, in honor of every journey, every child, and every future it carried." As the speeches began, the train herself remained silent, dignified. But within her core, something stirred, old magic vibrating like a heartbeat. She remembered. She remembered the cries of children in the 1940s. The laughter of pranksters in the 70s. The silence of fear in the early 90s. The sudden weight of absence when beloved names stopped appearing each September. She remembered Fred Weasley. She remembered Colin Creevey. She remembered Remus Lupin, once slouched in carriage 6, hand gripping a cane of silver-bound yew. And yet, she also remembered recovery. Neville Longbottom, now a professor, entered her compartment with confident strides. He sat in carriage 2, where he once cowered from Slytherins, and smiled at a nervous first year who couldn't stop asking questions. Hermione Granger boarded alongside Ron, now parents. Their daughter, Rose, peered out a window as the train gave a faint shudder of recognition. Even Harry Potter, quiet and weary, appeared at the edge of the platform. He didn't board. Not this year. But he placed a hand on the steel edge of the engine, eyes distant. He didn't speak aloud. He didn't have to. The train heard him all the same. Inside, the dining car had been restored to its original splendor, with gilded menus and floating lanterns. Thaddeus Thimble, ever faithful, appeared once to check compartments before fading back into the ether. The trolley witch sang quietly as she arranged her sweets. "I remember you all," she whispered. "You grew up here." As the whistle blew for departure, the Hogwarts Express began to move, not just with steam, but with purpose. Through the Highlands once more. Across bridges laced with magic. Past forests and rivers and ruins whispered about in textbooks and bedtime tales. Inside the compartments, children wrote letters home. They pressed noses to the glass. Some fought. Some cried. Some fell in love before the train reached Hogsmeade. And the Express absorbed it all. In her dreams that night, the train recalled everything. Evangeline Orford's hands in soot and parchment. The shouts of ministry officials debating tradition. The first click of wheels on enchanted rails. The fear of war. The joy of reunions. She dreamed of flames and frost, of flying letters and quiet revelations. She dreamed of every face. Every year. And when dawn rose again, she knew. She would keep dreaming. Because that was her gift. The Hogwarts Express did not simply carry students. She carried stories. And stories, like magic, never truly end. And there you have it, the untold, canon-inspired tale of the Hogwarts Express, from its magical invention under secrecy, to ghostly encounters in the dining car, to the terrifying days of war, and finally, to its enduring legacy as a symbol of hope, memory, and generations of magical journeys. We learned how witches and wizards, desperate for safe transport in the early 1800s, transformed a Muggle steam engine into something alive with enchantment and purpose. We met visionaries like Evangeline Orford, spectral conductors like Thaddeus Thimble, and brave students like Elias Dawlish, all of whom shaped the Express into the icon it is today. But here's the thing, the Hogwarts Express doesn't just carry students. It carries stories. And if you've made it this far into this story, you're exactly the kind of person who wants to keep exploring the secrets of the wizarding world. We know the Express leaves from platform 9 3/4. But in what real-world year did J.K. Rowling first reveal the full backstory of the train on Pottermore? Drop your answer in the comments below. I'm watching for the clever ones. And hey, if you enjoyed riding along through the lore today, don't forget to subscribe for more magical deep dives. I've got plenty more where this came from, unsolved mysteries, magical inventions, character breakdowns, all the juicy bits buried in the books and beyond. If this ride through wizarding history gave you chills, you'll love the one where we crack open the mystery of Harry Potter's diary. That one's linked right here on the end screen.